Chapter 13 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. There are no conditions to which a man cannot become used, especially if he sees that all around him are living in the same way. Levin could not have believed 3 months before that he could have gone quietly to sleep in the condition in which he was that day, that leading an aimless, irrational life, living too beyond his means, after drinking to excess (he could not call what happened at the club anything else), forming inappropriately friendly relations with a man with whom his wife had once been in love, and a still more inappropriate call upon a woman who could only be called a lost woman, after being fascinated by that woman and causing his wife distress, he could still go quietly to sleep. But under the influence of fatigue, a sleepless night, and the wine he had drunk, his sleep was sound and untroubled. At 5 o'clock the creak of a door opening waked him. He jumped up and looked round. Kitty was not in bed beside him, but there was a light moving behind the screen, and he heard her steps. "What is it? What is it?" he said, half asleep. "Kitty, what is it?" "Nothing," she said, coming from behind the screen with a candle in her hand. "I felt unwell," she said, smiling a particularly sweet and meaning smile. "What? Has it begun?" he said in terror. "We ought to send—" and hurriedly he reached after his clothes. "No, no," she said, smiling and holding his hand. "It's sure to be nothing. I was rather unwell, only a little. It's all over now." After getting into bed she blew out the candle, lay down and was still. Though he thought her stillness suspicious, as though she were holding her breath, and still more suspicious the expression of peculiar tenderness and excitement with which, as she came from behind the screen, she said "nothing," he was so sleepy that he fell asleep at once. Only later he remembered the stillness of her breathing, and understood all that must have been passing in her sweet, precious heart, while she lay beside him, not stirring, in anticipation of the greatest event in a woman's life. At 7 o'clock he was waked by the touch of her hand on his shoulder and a gentle whisper. She seemed struggling between regret at waking him and the desire to talk to him. "Kostya, don't be frightened. It's all right. But I fancy we ought to send for Lizaveta Petrovna." The candle was lighted again. She was sitting up in bed, holding some knitting which she had been busy upon during the last few days. "Please don't be frightened. It's all right. I'm not a bit afraid," she said, seeing his scared face, and she pressed his hand to her bosom and then to her lips. He hurriedly jumped up, hardly awake, and kept his eyes fixed on her, as he put on his dressing-gown. Then he stopped, still looking at her. He had to go, but he could not tear himself from her eyes. He thought he loved her face, knew her expression, her eyes, but never had he seen it like this. How hateful and horrible he seemed to himself, thinking of the distress he had caused her yesterday. Her flushed face, fringed with soft curling hair under her nightcap, was radiant with joy and courage. Though there was so little that was complex or artificial in Kitty's character in general, Levin was struck by what was revealed now, when suddenly all disguises were thrown off, and the very kernel of her soul shone in her eyes. And in this simplicity and nakedness of her soul, she, the very woman he loved in her, was more manifest than ever. She looked at him, smiling, but all at once her brows twitched, she threw up her head, and going quickly up to him, clutched his hand and pressed close up to him, breathing her hot breath upon him. She was in pain and was, as it were, complaining to him of her suffering. And for the first minute, from habit, it seemed to him that he was to blame. But in her eyes there was a tenderness that told him that she was far from reproaching him, that she loved him for her sufferings. "If not I, who is to blame for it?" he thought unconsciously, seeking someone responsible for this suffering for him to punish. But there was no one responsible. She was suffering, complaining, and triumphing in her sufferings, and rejoicing in them, and loving them. He saw that something sublime was being accomplished in her soul. But what? He could not make it out. It was beyond his understanding. "I have sent to mamma. You go quickly to fetch Lizaveta Petrovna. Kostya. Nothing. It's over." She moved away from him and rang the bell. "Well, go now. Pasha's coming. I am all right." And Levin saw with astonishment that she had taken up the knitting she had brought in the night and begun working at it again. As Levin was going out of one door, he heard the maidservant come in at the other. He stood at the door and heard Kitty give exact directions to the maid, and beginning to help her move the bedstead. He dressed, and while they were putting in his horses, as a hired sledge was not to be seen yet, he ran again up to the bedroom, not on tiptoe, it seemed to him, but on wings. Two maidservants were carefully moving something in the bedroom. Kitty was walking about, knitting rapidly, and giving directions. "I am going for the doctor. They have sent for Lizaveta Petrovna, but I'll go on there too. Isn't there anything wanted? Yes? Shall I go to Dolly's?" She looked at him, obviously not hearing what he was saying. "Yes, yes, do go," she said quickly, frowning and waving her hand to him. He had just gone into the drawing-room when suddenly a plaintive moan sounded from the bedroom, smothered instantly. He stood still, and for a long while he could not understand. "Yes, that is she," he said to himself, and clutching at his head he ran downstairs. "Lord have mercy on us, pardon us, aid us," he repeated the words that for some reason came suddenly to his lips. And he, an unbeliever, repeated these words not with his lips only. At that instant he knew that all his doubts, even the impossibility of believing with his reason, of which he was aware in himself, did not in the least hinder his turning to God. All of that now floated out of his soul like dust. To whom was he to turn if not to Him, in whose hands he felt himself, his soul, and his love? The horse was not yet ready, but feeling a peculiar concentration of his physical forces and his intellect on what he had to do, he started off on foot without waiting for the horse, and told Kouzma to overtake him. At the corner he met a night cabman driving hurriedly. In the little sledge, wrapped in a velvet cloak, sat Lizaveta Petrovna with a kerchief around her head. Thank God!" he said, overjoyed to recognize her little fair face, which wore a peculiarly serious, even stern expression. Telling the driver not to stop, he ran along beside her. "For 2 hours then? Not more?" she inquired. "You should let Pyotr Dmitrievitch know, but don't hurry him, and get some opium at the chemist's." "So you think that it may go on well? Lord have mercy on us and help us," Levin said, seeing his own horse driving out of the gate. Jumping into the sledge beside Kouzma, he told him to drive to the doctor's. Chapter 14. Chapter 14 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. The doctor was not yet up, and the footman said that he had been up late and had given orders not to be waked, but would get up soon. The footman was cleaning the lamp chimneys, and seemed very busy about them. This concentration of the footman upon his lamps, and his indifference to what was passing in Levin, at first astounded him, but immediately on considering the question he realized that no one knew or was bound to know his feelings, and that it was all the more necessary to act calmly, sensibly, and resolutely to get through this wall of indifference and attain his aim. "Don't be in a hurry or let anything slip," Levin said to himself, feeling a greater and greater flow of physical energy and attention to all that lay before him to do. Having ascertained that the doctor was not getting up, Levin considered various plans, and decided on the following one: that Kouzma should go for another doctor, while he himself would go to the chemist's for opium, and if when he came back the doctor had not yet begun to get up, he would either by tipping the footman or by force wake the doctor at all hazards. At the chemist's, the lank shopman sealed up a packet of powders for a coachman who stood waiting, and refused him opium with the same callousness with which the doctor's footman had cleaned his lamp chimneys. Trying not to get flurried or out of temper, Levin mentioned the names of the doctor and midwife, and explaining what the opium was needed for, tried to persuade him. The assistant inquired in German whether he should give it, and receiving an affirmative reply from behind the partition, he took out a bottle and a funnel, deliberately poured the opium from a bigger bottle into a little one, stuck on a label, sealed it up, in spite of Levin's request that he would not do so, and was about to wrap it up too. This was more than Levin could stand. He took the bottle firmly out of his hands and ran to the big glass doors. The doctor was not even now getting up, and the footman, busy now in putting down the rugs, refused to wake him. Levin deliberately took out a 10-rouble note, and, careful to speak slowly, though losing no time over the business, he handed him the note, and explained that Pyotr Dmitrievitch, what a great and important personage he seemed to Levin now, this Pyotr Dmitrievitch, who had been of so little consequence in his eyes before, had promised to come at any time, that he would certainly not be angry, and that he must therefore wake him at once. The footman agreed, and went upstairs, taking Levin into the waiting-room. Levin could hear through the door the doctor coughing, moving about, washing, and saying something. 3 minutes passed. It seemed to Levin that more than an hour had gone by. He could not wait any longer. "Pyotr Dmitrievitch! Pyotr Dmitrievitch!" he said in an imploring voice at the open door. "For God's sake, forgive me! See me as you are! It's been going on for more than 2 hours already." "In a minute," answered a voice, and to his amazement Levin heard that the doctor was smiling as he spoke. "For 1 instant." "In a minute." 2 minutes more passed while the doctor was putting on his boots, and 2 minutes more while the doctor put on his coat and combed his hair. "Pyotr Dmitrievitch," Levin was beginning again in a plaintive voice, just as the doctor came in dressed and ready. "These people have no conscience," thought Levin, "combing his hair while we're dying." "Good morning," the doctor said to him, shaking hands and, as it were, teasing him with his composure. "There's no hurry. Well now?" Trying to be as accurate as possible, Levin began to tell him every unnecessary detail of his wife's condition, interrupting his account repeatedly with entreaties that the doctor would come with him at once. "Oh, you needn't be in any hurry. You don't understand, you know. I'm certain I'm not wanted. Still, I've promised, and if you like, I'll come. But there's no hurry. Please sit down. Won't you have some coffee?" Levin stared at him with eyes that asked whether he was laughing at him, but the doctor had no notion of making fun of him. I know," the doctor said, smiling. "I'm a married man myself, and at these moments we husbands are very much to be pitied. I've a patient whose husband always takes refuge in the stables on such occasions." "But what do you think, Pyotr Dmitrievitch? Do you suppose it may go all right?" "Everything points to a favorable issue." "So you'll come immediately?" said Levin, looking wrathfully at the servant who was bringing in the coffee. "In an hour's time." "Oh, for mercy's sake!" "Well, let me drink my coffee, anyway." The doctor started upon his coffee. Both were silent. "The Turks are really getting beaten, though. Did you read yesterday's telegrams?" said the doctor, munching some roll. "No, I can't stand it," said Levin, jumping up. "So you'll be with us in a quarter of an hour?" "In half an hour." "On your honor?" When Levin got home, he drove up at the same time as the princess, and they went up to the bedroom door together. The princess had tears in her eyes, and her hands were shaking. Seeing Levin, she embraced him and burst into tears. "Well, my dear Lizaveta Petrovna?" she queried, clasping the hand of the midwife, who came out to meet them with a beaming and anxious face. "She's going on well," she said. "Persuade her to lie down. She will be easier so." From the moment when he had waked up and understood what was going on, Levin had prepared his mind to bear resolutely what was before him, and without considering or anticipating anything, to avoid upsetting his wife, and on the contrary to soothe her and keep up her courage. Without allowing himself even to think of what was to come, of how it would end, judging from his inquiries as to the usual duration of these ordeals, Levin had in his imagination braced himself to bear up and to keep a tight rein on his feelings for 5 hours, and it seemed to him he could do this. But when he came back from the doctor's and saw her sufferings again, he fell to repeating more and more frequently, "Lord, have mercy on us and succor us." He sighed and flung his head up and began to feel afraid he could not bear it, that he would burst into tears or run away. Such agony it was to him, and only 1 hour had passed. But after that hour there passed another, 2 hours, 3, the full 5 hours he had fixed as the furthest limit of his sufferings, and the position was still unchanged, and he was still bearing it because there was nothing to be done but bear it, every instant feeling that he had reached the utmost limits of his endurance, and that his heart would break with sympathy and pain. But still the minutes passed by, and the hours, and still hours more, and his misery and horror grew and were more and more intense. All the ordinary conditions of life, without which one can form no conception of anything, had ceased to exist for Levin. He had lost all sense of time. Minutes, those minutes when she sent for him and he held her moist hand, that would squeeze his hand with extraordinary violence and then push it away, seemed to him hours, and hours seemed to him minutes. He was surprised when Lizaveta Petrovna asked him to light a candle behind the screen, and he found that it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If he had been told it was only 10 o'clock in the morning, he would not have been more surprised. Where he was all this time, he knew as little as the time of anything. He saw her swollen face, sometimes bewildered and in agony, sometimes smiling and trying to reassure him. He saw the old princess too, flushed and overwrought, with her gray curls in disorder, forcing herself to gulp down her tears, biting her lips. He saw Dolly too, and the doctor, smoking fat cigarettes, and Lizaveta Petrovna with a firm, resolute, reassuring face, and the old prince walking up and down the hall with a frowning face. But why they came in and went out, where they were, he did not know. The princess was with the doctor in the bedroom, then in the study, where a table set for dinner suddenly appeared. Then she was not there, but Dolly was. Then Levin remembered he had been sent somewhere. Once he had been sent to move a table and sofa. He had done this eagerly, thinking it had to be done for her sake, and only later on he found it was his own bed he had been getting ready. Then he had been sent to the study to ask the doctor something. The doctor had answered, and then had said something about the irregularities in the municipal council. Then he had been sent to the bedroom to help the old princess to move the holy picture in its silver and gold setting. And with the princess's old waiting-maid he clambered on a shelf to reach it, and had broken the little lamp, and the old servant had tried to reassure him about the lamp and about his wife, and he carried the holy picture and set it at Kitty's head, carefully tucking it in behind the pillow. But where, when, and why all this had happened, he could not tell. He did not understand why the old princess took his hand, and looking compassionately at him, begged him not to worry himself, and Dolly persuaded him to eat something, and led him out of the room, and even the doctor looked seriously and with commiseration at him, and offered him a drop of something. All he knew and felt was that what was happening was what had happened nearly a year before in the hotel of the country town at the deathbed of his brother Nikolay. But that had been grief, this was joy. Yet that grief and this joy were alike outside all the ordinary conditions of life. They were loopholes, as it were, in that ordinary life through which there came glimpses of something sublime. And in the contemplation of this sublime something the soul was exalted to inconceivable heights, of which it had before had no conception, while reason lagged behind, unable to keep up with it. "Lord, have mercy on us and succor us," he repeated to himself incessantly, feeling, in spite of his long and, as it seemed, complete alienation from religion, that he turned to God just as trustfully and simply as he had in his childhood and first youth. All this time he had two distinct spiritual conditions. One was away from her, with the doctor, who kept smoking one fat cigarette after another and extinguishing them on the edge of a full ash-tray. With Dolly, and with the old prince, where there was talk about dinner, about politics, about Marya Petrovna's illness, and where Levin suddenly forgot for a moment what was happening, and felt as though he had waked up from sleep. The other was in her presence, at her pillow, where his heart seemed breaking and still did not break from sympathetic suffering. And he prayed to God without ceasing, and every time he was brought back from a moment of oblivion by a scream reaching him from the bedroom, he fell into the same strange terror that had come upon him the first minute. Every time he heard a shriek, he jumped up, ran to justify himself, remembered on the way that he was not to blame, and he longed to defend her, to help her. But as he looked at her, he saw again that help was impossible, and he was filled with terror and prayed, "Lord, have mercy on us and help us." And as time went on, both these conditions became more intense. The calmer he became away from her, completely forgetting her, the more agonizing became both her sufferings and his feeling of helplessness before them. He jumped up, would have liked to run away, but ran to her. Sometimes, when again and again she called upon him, he blamed her. But seeing her patient, smiling face, and hearing the words, "I am worrying you," he threw the blame on God. But thinking of God, at once he fell to beseeching God to forgive him and have mercy. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. He did not know whether it was late or early. The candles had all burned out. Dolly had just been in the study and had suggested to the doctor that he should lie down. Levin sat listening to the doctor's stories of a quack mesmerizer and looking at the ashes of his cigarette. There had been a period of repose, and he had sunk into oblivion. He had completely forgotten what was going on now. He heard the doctor's chat and understood it. Suddenly there came an unearthly shriek. The shriek was so awful that Levin did not even jump up, but holding his breath, gazed in a terrified inquiry at the doctor. The doctor put his head on one side, listened, and smiled approvingly. Everything was so extraordinary that nothing could strike Levin as strange. "I suppose it must be so," he thought, and still sat where he was. Whose scream was this? He jumped up, ran on tiptoe to the bedroom, edged round Lizaveta Petrovna and the princess, and took up his position at Kitty's pillow. The scream had subsided, but there was some change now. What it was he did not see and did not comprehend, and he had no wish to see or comprehend, but he saw it in the face of Lizaveta Petrovna. Lizaveta Petrovna's face was stern and pale, and still as resolute, though her jaws were twitching and her eyes were fixed intently on Kitty. Kitty's swollen and agonized face, a tress of hair clinging to her moist brow, was turned to him and sought his eyes. Her lifted hands asked for his hands. Clutching his chill hands in her moist ones, she began squeezing them to her face. "Don't go, don't go. I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid," she said rapidly. "Mamma, take my earrings, they bother me. You're not afraid? Quick, quick, Lizaveta Petrovna!" She spoke quickly, very quickly, and tried to smile. But suddenly her face was drawn, she pushed him away. "Oh, this is awful! I'm dying, I'm dying! Go away!" she shrieked, and again he heard that unearthly scream. Levin clutched at his head and ran out of the room. "It's nothing, it's nothing, it's all right," Dolly called after him. But they might say what they liked, he knew now that all was over. He stood in the next room, his head leaning against the doorpost, and heard shrieks, howls such as he had never heard before, and he knew that what had been Kitty was uttering those shrieks. He had long ago ceased to wish for the child. By now he loathed this child. He did not even wish for her life now. All that he longed for was the end of this awful anguish. "Doctor, what is it? What is it? By God!" he said, snatching at the doctor's hand as he came up. "It's the end," said the doctor, and the doctor's face was so grave as he said it that Levin took "the end" as meaning her death. Beside him he ran into the bedroom. The first thing he saw was the face of Lizaveta Petrovna. It was even more frowning and stern. Kitty's face he did not know. In the place where it had been was something that was fearful in its strange distortion and in the sound that came from it. He fell down with his head on the wooden framework of the bed, feeling that his heart was bursting. The awful scream never paused. It became still more awful, and as though it had reached the utmost limit of terror, suddenly it ceased. Levin could not believe his ears, but there could be no doubt. The scream had ceased, and he heard a subdued stir and bustle, and hurried breathing, and her voice, gasping, alive, tender, and blissful, uttered softly, "It's over." He lifted his head, with her hands hanging exhausted on the quilt, looking extraordinarily lovely and serene. She looked at him in silence and tried to smile, and could not. And suddenly, from the mysterious and awful far-away world in which he had been living for the last 22 hours, Levin felt himself all in an instant borne back to the old everyday world, glorified though now, by such a radiance of happiness that he could not bear it. The strained chords snapped. Sobs and tears of joy which he had never foreseen rose up with such violence that his whole body shook, that for long they prevented him from speaking. Falling on his knees before the bed, he held his wife's hand before his lips and kissed it, and the hand, with a weak movement of the fingers, responded to his kiss. And meanwhile, there at the foot of the bed, in the deft hands of Lizaveta Petrovna, like a flickering light in a lamp, lay the life of a human creature, which had never existed before, and which would now, with the same right, with the same importance to itself, live and create in its own image. "Alive, alive, and a boy too! Set your mind at rest," Levin heard Lizaveta Petrovna saying as she slapped the baby's back with a shaking hand. "Mamma, is it true?" said Kitty's voice. The princess's sobs were all the answers she could make. And in the midst of the silence there came, in unmistakable reply to the mother's question, a voice quite unlike the subdued voices speaking in the room. It was the bold, clamorous, self-assertive squall of the new human being, who had so incomprehensibly appeared. If Levin had been told before that Kitty was dead, and that he had died with her, and that their children were angels, and that God was standing before him, he would have been surprised at nothing. But now, coming back to the world of reality, he had to make great mental efforts to take in that she was alive and well, and that the creature squalling so desperately was his son. Kitty was alive, her agony was over, and he was unutterably happy. That he understood. He was completely happy in it. But the baby? Whence? Why? Who was he? He could not get used to the idea. It seemed to him something extraneous, superfluous, to which he could not accustom himself. Chapter 16. Chapter 16 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. At 10 o'clock the old prince, Sergey Ivanovitch and Stepan Arkadyevitch were sitting at Levin's. Having inquired after Kitty, they had dropped into conversation upon other subjects. Levin heard them, and unconsciously, as they talked, going over the past, over what had been up to that morning, he thought of himself as he had been yesterday till that point. It was as though 100 years had passed since then. He felt himself exalted to unattainable heights, from which he studiously lowered himself so as not to wound the people he was talking to. He talked, and was all the time thinking of his wife, of her condition now, of his son, in whose existence he tried to school himself into believing. The whole world of woman, which had taken for him since his marriage a new value he had never suspected before, was now so exalted that he could not take it in with his imagination. He heard them talk of yesterday's dinner at the club and thought, "What is happening with her now? Is she asleep? How is she? What is she thinking? Is he crying, my son Dmitri?" And in the middle of the conversation, in the middle of a sentence, he jumped up and went out of the room. "Send me word if I can see her," said the prince. "Very well, in a minute," answered Levin, and without stopping he went to her room. She was not asleep. She was talking gently with her mother, making plans about the christening. Carefully set to rights, with her hair well brushed, in a smart little cap with some blue in it, her arms out on the quilt, she was lying on her back. Meeting his eyes, her eyes drew him to her. Her face, bright before, brightened still more as he drew near her. There was the same change in it from earthly to unearthly that is seen in the face of the dead. But then it means farewell. Here it meant welcome. Again a rush of emotion, such as he had felt at the moment of the child's birth, flooded his heart. She took his hand and asked him if he had slept. He could not answer, and turned away, struggling with his weakness. "I have had a nap, Kostya," she said to him, "and I am so comfortable now." She looked at him, but suddenly her expression changed. "Give him to me," she said, hearing the baby's cry. "Give him to me, Lizaveta Petrovna, and he shall look at him." "To be sure, his papa shall look at him," said Lizaveta Petrovna, getting up and bringing something red and queer and wriggling. "Wait a minute, we'll make him tidy first." And Lizaveta Petrovna laid the red wobbling thing on the bed, began untrussing and trussing up the baby, lifting it up and turning it over with one finger and powdering it with something. Levin, looking at the tiny pitiful creature, made strenuous efforts to discover in his heart some traces of fatherly feeling for it. He felt nothing towards it but disgust. But when it was undressed, and he caught a glimpse of wee little hands, little feet, saffron-colored, with little toes too, and positively with a little big toe different from the rest, and when he saw Lizaveta Petrovna closing the wide-open little hands as though they were soft springs, and putting them into linen garments, such pity for the little creature came upon him, and such terror that she would hurt it, that he held her hand back. Lizaveta Petrovna laughed. "Don't be frightened, don't be frightened." When the baby had been put to rights and transformed into a firm doll, Lizaveta Petrovna dandled it as though proud of her handiwork, and stood a little away, so that Levin might see his son in all his glory. Kitty looked sideways in the same direction, never taking her eyes off the baby. "Give him to me, give him to me," she said, and even made as though she would sit up. "What are you thinking of, Katerina Alexandrovna? You mustn't move like that. Wait a minute, I'll give him to you. Here we're showing papa what a fine fellow we are." And Lizaveta Petrovna, with one hand supporting the wobbling head, lifted up on the other arm the strange, limp, red creature, whose head was lost in its swaddling clothes. But it had a nose too, and slanting eyes, and smacking lips. "A splendid baby," said Lizaveta Petrovna. Levin sighed with mortification. This splendid baby excited in him no feeling but disgust and compassion. It was not at all the feeling he had looked forward to. He turned away while Lizaveta Petrovna put the baby to the unaccustomed breast. Suddenly laughter made him look round. The baby had taken the breast. "Come, that's enough, said Lizaveta Petrovna, but Kitty would not let the baby go. He fell asleep in her arms. "Look, now," said Kitty, turning the baby so he could see it. The aged-looking little face suddenly puckered up still more, and the baby sneezed. Smiling, hardly able to restrain his tears, Levin kissed his wife and went out of the dark room. What he felt towards this little creature was utterly unlike what he had expected. There was nothing cheerful and joyous in the feeling. On the contrary, it was a new torture of apprehension. It was the consciousness of a new sphere of liability to pain. And this sense was so painful at first, the apprehension lest this helpless creature should suffer was so intense, that it prevented him from noticing the strange thrill of senseless joy and even pride that he had felt when the baby sneezed. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Stepan Arkadyevitch's affairs were in a very bad way. The money for 2/3 of the forest had all been spent already, and he had borrowed from the merchant in advance, at 10% discount, almost all the remaining third. The merchant would not give more, especially as Darya Alexandrovna, for the first time that winter insisting on her right to her own property, had refused to sign the receipt for the payment of the last third of the forest. All his salary went on household expenses and in payment of petty debts that could not be put off. There was positively no money. This was unpleasant and awkward, and in Stepan Arkadyevitch's opinion things could not go on like this. The explanation of the position was, in his view, to be found in the fact that his salary was too small. The post he filled had been unmistakably very good 5 years ago, but it was so no longer. Petrov, the bank director, had 12,000. Sventitsky, a company director, had 17,000. Mitin, who had founded a bank, received 50,000. "Clearly I've been napping, and they've overlooked me," Stepan Arkadyevitch thought about himself. And he began keeping his eyes and ears open, and towards the end of the winter he had discovered a very good berth and had formed a plan of attack upon it, at first from Moscow, through aunts, uncles, and friends, and then, when the matter was well advanced, in the spring, he went himself to Petersburg. It was one of those snug, lucrative berths of which there are so many more nowadays than there used to be, with incomes ranging from 1,000 to 50,000 roubles. It was the post of secretary of the committee of the amalgamated agency of the Southern Railways, and of certain banking companies. This position, like all such appointments, called for such immense energy and such varied qualifications that it was difficult for them to be found united in any one man. And since a man combining all the qualifications was not to be found, it was at least better that the post be filled by an honest than by a dishonest man. And Stepan Arkadyevitch was not merely an honest man, unemphatically. In the common acception of the words, he was an honest man, emphatically, in that special sense which the word has in Moscow, when they talk of an honest politician and an honest writer, an honest newspaper, an honest institution, an honest tendency, meaning not simply that the man or the institution is not dishonest, but that they are capable on occasion of taking a line of their own in opposition to the authorities. Stepan Arkadyevitch moved in those circles in Moscow in which that expression had come into use, was regarded there as an honest man, and so had more right to this appointment than others. The appointment yielded an income from 7,000 to 10,000 a year, and Oblonsky could fill it without giving up his government position. It was in the hands of 2 ministers, 1 lady, and 2 Jews, and all these people, though the way had been paved already with them, Stepan Arkadyevitch had to see in Petersburg. Besides this business, Stepan Arkadyevitch had promised his sister Anna to obtain from Karenin a definite answer on the question of divorce, and begging 50 roubles from Dolly, he set off for Petersburg. Stepan Arkadyevitch sat in Karenin's study listening to his report on the causes of the unsatisfactory position of Russian finance, and only waiting for the moment when he would finish to speak about his own business or about Anna. "Yes, that's very true," he said, when Alexey Alexandrovitch took off his pince-nez, without which he could not read now, and looked inquiringly at his former brother-in-law. "That's very true in particular cases, but still the principle of our day is freedom." "Yes, but I lay down another principle, embracing the principle of freedom," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, with emphasis on the word embracing. And he put on his pince-nez again, so as to read the passage in which this statement was made. And turning over the beautifully written, wide-margined manuscript, Alexey Alexandrovitch read aloud over again the conclusive passage. "I don't advocate protection for the sake of private interests, but for the public weal, and for the lower and upper classes equally," he said, looking over his pince-nez at Oblonsky. "But they cannot grasp that they are taken up now with personal interests and carried away by phrases." Stepan Arkadyevitch knew that when Karenin began to talk of what they were doing and thinking, the persons who would not accept his report and were the cause of everything wrong in Russia, that it was coming near the end. And so now he eagerly abandoned the principle of free trade and fully agreed. Alexey Alexandrovitch paused, thoughtfully turning over the pages of his manuscript. "Oh, by the way," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, "I wanted to ask you, some time when you see Pomorsky, to drop him a hint that I should be very glad to get that new appointment of secretary of the committee of the amalgamated agency of the Southern Railways and banking companies." Stepan Arkadyevitch was familiar by now with the title of the post he coveted, and he brought it out rapidly without mistake. Alexey Alexandrovitch questioned him as to the duties of this new committee, and pondered. He was considering whether the new committee would not be acting in some way contrary to the views he had been advocating. But as the influence of the new committee was of a very complex nature, and his views were of very wide application, he could not decide this straight off, and taking off his pince-nez, he said, Of course, I can mention it to him. But what is your reason precisely for wishing to obtain the appointment?" "It's a good salary, rising to 9,000, and my means—" "9,000!" repeated Alexey Alexandrovitch, and he frowned. The high figure of the salary made him reflect that on that side Stepan Arkadyevitch's proposal ran counter to the main tendency of his own projects of reform, which always leaned towards economy. "I consider, and I have embodied my views in a note on the subject, that in our days these immense salaries are evidence of the unsound economic assiette of our finances." "But what's to be done?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Suppose a bank director gets 10,000. Well, he's worth it. Or an engineer gets 20,000. After all, it's a growing thing, you know." "I assume that a salary is the price paid for a commodity, and it ought to conform with the law of supply and demand. If the salary is fixed without any regard for that law, as, for instance, when I see two engineers leaving college together, both equally well trained and efficient, and one getting 40,000 while the other is satisfied with 2, or when I see lawyers and hussars, having no special qualifications, appointed directors of banking companies with immense salaries, I conclude that the salary is not fixed in accordance with the law of supply and demand, but simply through personal interest. And this is an abuse of great gravity in itself, and one that reacts injuriously on the government service. I consider—" Stepan Arkadyevitch made haste to interrupt his brother-in-law. "Yes, but you must agree that it's a new institution of undoubted utility that's being started. After all, you know, it's a growing thing. What they lay particular stress on is the thing being carried on honestly," said Stepan Arkadyevitch with emphasis. But the Moscow significance of the word "honest" was lost on Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Honesty is only a negative qualification," he said. "Well, you'll do me a great service anyway," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, "by putting in a word to Pomorsky, just in the way of conversation." "But I fancy it's more in Volgarinov's hands," said Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Volgarinov has fully assented, as far as he's concerned," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, turning red. Stepan Arkadyevitch reddened at the mention of that name, because he had been that morning at the Jew Volgarinov's, and the visit had left an unpleasant recollection. Stepan Arkadyevitch believed most positively that the committee in which he was trying to get an appointment was a new, genuine, and honest public body. But that morning, when Volgarinov had, intentionally beyond doubt, kept him 2 hours waiting with other petitioners in his waiting-room, he had suddenly felt uneasy. Whether he was uncomfortable that he, a descendant of Rurik, Prince Oblonsky, had been kept for 2 hours waiting to see a Jew, or that for the first time in his life he was not following the example of his ancestors in serving the government, but was turning off into a new career. Anyway, he was very uncomfortable. During those 2 hours in Volgarinov's waiting-room, Stepan Arkadyevitch, stepping jauntily about the room, pulling his whiskers, entering into conversation with the other petitioners, and inventing an epigram on his position, assiduously concealed from others, and even from himself, the feeling he was experiencing. But all the time he was uncomfortable and angry. He could not have said why, whether because he could not get his epigram just right, or for some other reason. When at last Volgarinov had received him with exaggerated politeness and unmistakable triumph at his humiliation, and had all but refused the favor asked of him, Stepan Arkadyevitch had made haste to forget it as soon as possible, and now, at the mere recollection, he blushed. Chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. "Now there is something I want to talk to you about, and you know what it is. About Anna," Stepan Arkadyevitch said, pausing for a brief space and shaking off the unpleasant impression. As soon as Oblonsky uttered Anna's name, the face of Alexey Alexandrovitch was completely transformed. All the life was gone out of it, and it looked weary and dead. "What is it exactly that you want from me?" he said, moving in his chair and snapping his pince-nez. "A definite statement, Alexey Alexandrovitch, some settlement of the position. I'm appealing to you, not as an injured husband, Stepan Arkadyevitch was going to say, but afraid of wrecking his negotiation by this, he changed the words. Not as a statesman, which did not sound apropos, but simply as a man, and a good-hearted man, and a Christian. You must have pity on her, he said. That is, in what way precisely? Karenin said softly. Yes, pity on her. If you have seen her as I have been spending all the winter with her, you would have pity on her. Her position is awful, simply awful. I had imagined, answered Alexey Alexandrovitch in a higher, almost shrill voice, that Anna Arkadyevna had everything she had desired for herself. Oh, Alexey Alexandrovitch, for heaven's sake, don't let us indulge in recriminations. What is past, and you know what she wants, and is waiting for. Divorce. But I believe Anna Arkadyevna refuses a divorce, if I make it a condition to leave me my son. I replied in that sense, and supposed that the matter was ended. I consider it at an end," shrieked Alexey Alexandrovitch. "But for heaven's sake don't get hot," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, touching his brother-in-law's knee. "The matter is not ended. If you will allow me to recapitulate, it was like this. When you parted, you were as magnanimous as could possibly be. You were ready to give her everything, freedom, divorce even. She appreciated that. No, don't think that. She did appreciate it. To such a degree that at the first moment, feeling how she had wronged you, she did not consider and could not consider everything. She gave up everything, but experience, time, have shown that her position is unbearable, impossible. The life of Anna Arkadyevna can have no interest for me," Alexey Alexandrovitch put in, lifting his eyebrows. "Allow me to disbelieve that," Stepan Arkadyevitch replied gently. "Her position is intolerable for her, and of no benefit to anyone whatever. She has deserved it, you will say. She knows that, and asks you for nothing. She says plainly that she dare not ask you. But I, all of us, her relatives, all who love her, beg you, entreat you. Why should she suffer? Who is any the better for it?" "Excuse me, you seem to put me in the position of the guilty party," observed Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Oh no, not at all. Please understand me," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, touching his hand again, as though feeling sure this physical contact would soften his brother-in-law. "All I say is this: her position is intolerable, and it might be alleviated by you, and you will lose nothing by it. I will arrange it all for you, so that you'll not notice it. You did promise it, you know." "The promise was given before, and I supposed that the question of my son had settled the matter. Besides, I had hoped that Anna Arkadyevna had enough generosity," Alexey Alexandrovitch articulated with difficulty, his lips twitching, and his face white. "She leaves it all to your generosity. She begs, she implores one thing of you, to extricate her from the impossible position in which she is placed. She does not ask for her son now. Alexey Alexandrovitch, you are a good man. Put yourself in her position for a minute. The question of divorce for her in her position is a question of life and death. If you had not promised it once, she would have reconciled herself to her position. She would have gone on living in the country. But you promised it, and she wrote to you and moved to Moscow. And here she's been 6 months in Moscow, where every chance meeting cuts her to the heart, every day expecting an answer. Why, it's like keeping a condemned criminal for 6 months with the rope round his neck, promising him perhaps death, perhaps mercy. Have pity on her, and I will undertake to arrange everything. Vos scrupules?" "I am not talking about that, Alexey Alexandrovitch interrupted with disgust. "But, perhaps, I promised what I had no right to promise." "So you go back from your promise?" "I have never refused to do all that is possible, but I want time to consider how much of what I promised is possible." "No, Alexey Alexandrovitch," cried Oblonsky, jumping up. "I won't believe that. She's unhappy as only an unhappy woman can be, and you cannot refuse in such... as much of what I promised as is possible. Vous professez d'être libre penseur, but I as a believer cannot, in a matter of such gravity, act in opposition to the Christian law." "But in Christian societies and among us, as far as I'm aware, divorce is allowed," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Divorce is sanctioned even by our church, and we see...." "It's allowed, but not in the sense...." "Alexey Alexandrovitch, you are not like yourself," said Oblonsky, after a brief pause. "Wasn't it you, and didn't we all appreciate it in you, who forgave everything, and moved simply by Christian feeling was ready to make any sacrifice? You said yourself, 'If a man take thy coat, give him thy cloak also.' And now...." "I beg," said Alexey Alexandrovitch shrilly, getting suddenly to his feet, his face white and his jaws twitching, "I beg you to drop this subject." "Oh, no! Oh, forgive me if I have wounded you," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, holding out his hand with a smile of embarrassment. "But like a messenger I have simply performed the commission given me." Alexey Alexandrovitch gave him his hand, pondered a little, and said, "I must think it over and seek for guidance. The day after tomorrow I will give you a final answer," he said, after considering a moment. Chapter 19 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Stepan Arkadyevitch was about to go away when Korney came in to announce, "Sergey Alexeyevitch." "Who is Sergey Alexeyevitch?" Stepan Arkadyevitch was beginning, but he remembered immediately. "Ah, Seryozha!" he said aloud. "Sergey Alexeyevitch. I thought it was the director of a department. Anna asked me to see him too," he thought. As he recalled the timid, piteous expression with which Anna had said to him at parting, "Anyway, you will see him. Find out exactly where he is and who is looking after him. And Stiva, if it were possible, could it be possible?" Stepan Arkadyevitch knew what was meant by that, "if it were possible." If it were possible to arrange the divorce so as to let her have her son, Stepan Arkadyevitch saw now that it was no good to dream of that, but still he was glad to see his nephew. Alexey Alexandrovitch reminded his brother-in-law that they never spoke to the boy of his mother, and he begged him not to mention a single word about her. "He was very ill after that interview with his mother, which we had not foreseen," said Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Indeed, we feared for his life. But with rational treatment and sea-bathing in the summer, he regained his strength, and now, by the doctor's advice, I have let him go to school. And certainly the companionship of school has had a good effect on him, and he is perfectly well, and making good progress." "What a fine fellow he's grown! He's not Seryozha now, but quite full-fledged Sergey Alexeyevitch," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, smiling, as he looked at the handsome, broad-shouldered lad in a blue coat and long trousers, who walked in alertly and confidently. The boy looked healthy and good-humored. He bowed to his uncle as to a stranger, but recognizing him, he blushed and turned hurriedly away from him, as though offended and irritated at something. The boy went up to his father and handed him a note of the marks he had gained in school. "Well, that's very fair," said his father. "You can go." "He's thinner and taller, and has grown out of being a child into a boy. I like that," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Do you remember me?" The boy looked back quickly at his uncle. "Yes, mon uncle," he answered, glancing at his father, and again he looked downcast. His uncle called him to him and took his hand. "Well, and how are you getting on?" he said, wanting to talk to him, and not knowing what to say. The boy, blushing and making no answer, cautiously drew his hand away. As soon as Stepan Arkadyevitch let go his hand, he glanced doubtfully at his father, and like a bird set free, he darted out of the room. A year had passed since the last time Seryozha had seen his mother. Since then he had heard nothing more of her, and in the course of that year he had gone to school and made friends among his schoolfellows. The dreams and memories of his mother, which had made him ill after seeing her, did not occupy his thoughts now. When they came back to him, he studiously drove them away, regarding them as shameful and girlish, below the dignity of a boy and a schoolboy. He knew that his father and mother were separated by some quarrel. He knew that he had to remain with his father, and he tried to get used to that idea. He disliked seeing his uncle, so like his mother, for it called up those memories of which he was ashamed. He disliked it all the more as from some words he had caught as he waited at the study door, and still more from the faces of his father and uncle. He guessed that they must have been talking of his mother, and to avoid condemning the father with whom he lived and on whom he was dependent, and, above all, to avoid giving way to sentimentality, which he considered so degrading, Seryozha tried not to look at his uncle who had come to disturb his peace of mind, and not to think of what he recalled to him. But when Stepan Arkadyevitch, going out after him, saw him on the stairs, and calling to him, asked how he spent his playtime at school, Seryozha talked more freely to him away from his father's presence. "We have a railway now," he said in answer to his uncle's question. "It's like this, do you see? Two sit on a bench, they're the passengers, and one stands up straight on the bench, and all are harnessed in by their arms or by their belts, and they run through all the rooms, the doors are left open beforehand. Well, and it's pretty hard work being the conductor." "That's the one that stands?" Stepan Arkadyevitch inquired, smiling. "Yes, you want pluck for it, and cleverness too, especially when they stop all of a sudden, or someone falls down." "Yes, that must be a serious matter," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, watching with mournful interest the eager eyes, like his mother's, not childish now, no longer fully innocent. And though he had promised Alexey Alexandrovitch not to speak of Anna, he could not restrain himself. "Do you remember your mother?" he asked suddenly. "No, I don't," Seryozha said quickly. He blushed crimson, and his face clouded over, and his uncle could get nothing more out of him. His tutor found his pupil on the staircase half an hour later, and for a long while he could not make out whether he was ill-tempered or crying. "What is it? I expect you hurt yourself when you fell down," said the tutor. "I told you it was a dangerous game, and we shall have to speak to the director." "If I had hurt myself nobody should have found out, that's certain." "Well, what is it then?" "Leave me alone. If I remember, or if I don't remember, what business is it of his? Why should I remember? Leave me in peace," he said, addressing not his tutor, but the whole world. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Stepan Arkadyevitch, as usual, did not waste his time in Petersburg. In Petersburg, besides business, his sister's divorce, and his coveted appointment, he wanted, as he always did, to freshen himself up, as he said, after the mustiness of Moscow. In spite of its café chantant and its omnibuses, Moscow was yet a stagnant bog. Stepan Arkadyevitch always felt it. After living for some time in Moscow, especially in close relations with his family, he was conscious of a depression of spirits. After being a long time in Moscow without a change, he reached a point when he positively began to be worrying himself over his wife's ill humor and reproaches, over his children's health and education, and the petty details of his official work. Even the fact of being in debt worried him. But he had only to go and stay a little while in Petersburg, in the circle there in which he moved, where people lived, really lived, instead of vegetating as in Moscow, and all such ideas vanished and melted away at once, like wax before the fire. His wife? Only that day he had been talking to Prince Tchetchensky. Prince Tchetchensky had a wife and family, grown-up pages in the corps, and he had another illegitimate family of children also. Though the first family was very nice too, Prince Tchetchensky felt happier in his second family, and he used to take his eldest son with him to his second family, and told Stepan Arkadyevitch that he thought it good for his son, enlarging his ideas. What would have been said to that in Moscow? His children? In Petersburg children did not prevent their parents from enjoying life. The children were brought up in schools, and there was no trace of the wild idea that prevailed in Moscow, in Lvov's household for instance, that all the luxuries of life were for the children, while the parents have nothing but work and anxiety. Here people understood that a man is in duty bound to live for himself, as every man of culture should live. His official duties? Official work here was not the stiff, hopeless drudgery that it was in Moscow. Here there was some interest in official life. A chance meeting, a service rendered, a happy phrase, a knack of facetious mimicry, and a man's career might be made in a trice. So it had been with Bryantsev, whom Stepan Arkadyevitch had met the previous day, and who was one of the highest functionaries in government now. There was some interest in official work like that. The Petersburg attitude on pecuniary matters had an especially soothing effect on Stepan Arkadyevitch. Bartnyansky, who must spend at least 50,000 to judge by the style he lived in, had made an interesting comment the day before on that subject. As they were talking before dinner, Stepan Arkadyevitch had said to Bartnyansky, "You're friendly, I fancy, with Mordvinsky. You might do me a favor. Say a word to him, please, for me. There's an appointment I should like to get. Secretary of the agency." "Oh, I shan't remember all that if you tell it to me. But what possesses you to have to do with railways and Jews? Take it as you will, it's a low business." Stepan Arkadyevitch did not say to Bartnyansky that it was a growing thing. Bartnyansky would not have understood that. "I want the money. I've nothing to live on." "You're living, aren't you?" "Yes, but in debt." "Are you, though?" "Heavily?" said Bartnyansky sympathetically. "Very heavily. 20,000." Bartnyansky broke into good-humored laughter. "Oh, lucky fellow!" he said. "My debts mount up to 1,500,000, and I've nothing, and still I can live, as you see." And Stepan Arkadyevitch saw the correctness of this view not in words only, but in actual fact. Zhivahov owed 3,000, and hadn't a farthing to bless himself with, and he lived, and in style too. Count Krivtsov was considered a hopeless case by everyone, and yet he kept 2 mistresses. Petrovsky had run through 5 millions and still lived in just the same style, and was even a manager in the financial department with a salary of 20,000. But besides this, Petersburg had physically an agreeable effect on Stepan Arkadyevitch. It made him younger. In Moscow he sometimes found a gray hair in his head, dropped asleep after dinner, stretched, walked slowly upstairs, breathing heavily, was bored by the society of young women, and did not dance at balls. In Petersburg he always felt 10 years younger. His experience in Petersburg was exactly what had been described to him on a previous day by Prince Pyotr Oblonsky, a man of 60, who had just come back from abroad. "We don't know the way to live here," said Pyotr Oblonsky. "I spent the summer in Baden, and you wouldn't believe it, I felt quite a young man. At a glimpse of a pretty woman, my thoughts. One dines and drinks a glass of wine, and feels strong and ready for anything. I came home to Russia, had to see my wife, and, what's more, go to my country place. And there, you'd hardly believe it, in a fortnight I'd got into a dressing gown and giving up dressing for dinner. Needn't say I had no thoughts left for pretty women. I became quite an old gentleman. There was nothing left for me but to think of my eternal salvation. I went off to Paris. I was as right as could be at once." Stepan Arkadyevitch felt exactly the difference that Pyotr Oblonsky described. In Moscow he degenerated so much that if he had had to be there for long together, he might in good earnest have come to considering his salvation. In Petersburg he felt himself a man of the world again. Between Princess Betsy Tverskaya and Stepan Arkadyevitch there had long existed rather curious relations. Stepan Arkadyevitch always flirted with her in jest, and used to say to her, also in jest, the most unseemly things, knowing that nothing delighted her so much. The day after his conversation with Karenina, Stepan Arkadyevitch went to see her, and felt so youthful that in this jesting flirtation and nonsense he recklessly went so far that he did not know how to extricate himself, as unluckily he was so far from being attracted by her that he thought her positively disagreeable. What made it hard to change the conversation was the fact that he was very attractive to her, so that he was considerably relieved at the arrival of Princess Myakaya, which cut short their tête-à-tête. "Ah, so you're here," she said when she saw him. "Well, and what news of your poor sister? You needn't look at me like that," she added. "Ever since they've all turned against her, all those who are 1,000 times worse than she, I've thought she did a very fine thing. I can't forgive Vronsky for not letting me know when she was in Petersburg. I'd have gone to see her, and gone about with her everywhere. Please give her my love. Come, tell me about her." "Yes, her position is very difficult. She," began Stepan Arkadyevitch, in the simplicity of his heart accepting as sterling coin Princess Myakaya's words, "Tell me about her." Princess Myakaya interrupted him immediately, as she always did, and began talking herself. "She's done what they all do, except me, only they hide it. But she wouldn't be deceitful, and she did a fine thing. She did better still in throwing up that crazy brother-in-law of yours. You must excuse me. Everybody used to say he was so clever, so very clever. I was the only one that said he was a fool. Now that he's so thick with Lidia Ivanovna and Landau, they all say he's crazy, and I should prefer not to agree with everybody, but this time I can't help it." "Oh, do please explain," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "What does it mean? Yesterday I was seeing him on my sister's behalf, and I asked him to give me a final answer. He gave me no answer, and said he would think it over. But this morning, instead of an answer, I received an invitation from Countess Lidia Ivanovna for this evening." "Ah, so that's it, said Princess Myakaya gleefully. "They're going to ask Landau what he's to say." "Ask Landau? What for? Who or what's Landau?" "What? You don't know Jules Landau? Le fameux Jules Landau, le clairvoyant? He's crazy too, but on him your sister's fate depends. See what comes of living in the provinces. You know nothing about anything. Landau, do you see, was a commis in a shop in Paris, and he went to a doctor's. And in the doctor's waiting room he fell asleep, and in his sleep he began giving advice to all the patients. And wonderful advice it was! Then the wife of Yuri Meledinsky, you know, the invalid, heard of this Landau and had him to see her husband. And he cured her husband, though I can't say that I see he did him much good, for he's just as feeble a creature as ever he was, but they believed in him, and took him along with them, and brought him to Russia. Here there's been a general rush to him, and he's begun doctoring everyone. He cured Countess Bezzubova, and she took such a fancy to him that she adopted him." "Adopted him?" "Yes, as her son. He's not Landau any more, but Count Bezzubov. That's neither here nor there, though. But Lydia, I'm very fond of her, but she has a screw loose somewhere, has lost her heart to this Landau now, and nothing is settled now in her house or Alexey Alexandrovitch's without him, and so your sister's fate is now in the hands of Landau, alias Count Bezzubov." Chapter 21 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. After a capital dinner and a great deal of cognac drunk at Bartnyansky's, Stepan Arkadyevitch, only a little later than the appointed time, went in to Countess Lidia Ivanovna's. "Who else is with the countess? A Frenchman?" Stepan Arkadyevitch asked the hall porter as he glanced at the familiar overcoat of Alexey Alexandrovitch and a queer, rather artless-looking overcoat with clasps. "Alexey Alexandrovitch Karenin and Count Bezzubov," the porter answered severely. "Princess Myakaya guessed right," thought Stepan Arkadyevitch as he went upstairs. "Curious. It would be quite as well, though, to get on friendly terms with her. She has immense influence. If she would say a word to Pomorsky, the thing would be a certainty." It was still quite light out of doors, but in Countess Lidia Ivanovna's little drawing‐room the blinds were drawn and the lamps lighted. At a round table under a lamp sat the countess and Alexey Alexandrovitch, talking softly. A short, thinnish man, very pale and handsome, with feminine hips and knock-kneed legs, with fine brilliant eyes and long hair laying on the collar of his coat, was standing at the end of the room gazing at the portraits on the wall. After greeting the lady of the house and Alexey Alexandrovitch, Stepan Arkadyevitch could not resist glancing once more at the unknown man. "Monsieur Landau," the countess addressed him with a softness and caution that impressed Oblonsky, and she introduced them. Landau looked round hurriedly, came up, and smiling, laid his moist, lifeless hand in Stepan Arkadyevitch's outstretched hand, and immediately walked away, and fell to gazing at the portraits again. The countess and Alexey Alexandrovitch looked at each other significantly. "I'm very glad to see you, particularly today," said Countess Lidia Ivanovna, pointing Stepan Arkadyevitch to a seat beside Karenin. "I introduced you to him as Landau," she said in a soft voice, glancing at the Frenchman, and again immediately after at Alexey Alexandrovitch. "But he is really Count Bezzubov, as you're probably aware. Only he does not like the title." "Yes, I heard so," answered Stepan Arkadyevitch. "They say he completely cured Countess Bezzubova." "She was here today, poor thing," the countess said, turning to Alexey Alexandrovitch. "This separation is awful for her. It's such a blow to her." "And he positively is going?" queried Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Yes, he's going to Paris. He heard a voice yesterday," said Countess Lidia Ivanovna, looking at Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Ah, a voice," repeated Oblonsky, feeling that he must be as circumspect as he possibly could in this society, where something peculiar was going on, or was to go on, to which he had not the key. A moment's silence followed, after which Countess Lidia Ivanovna, as though approaching the main topic of conversation, said with a fine smile to Oblonsky: "I've known you for a long while, and I am very glad to make a closer acquaintance with you. Les amis de nos amis sont nos amis. But to be a true friend one must enter into the spiritual state of one's friend, and I fear that you are not doing so in the case of Alexey Alexandrovitch. You understand what I mean?" she said, lifting her fine pensive eyes. "In part, countess, I understand the position of Alexey Alexandrovitch," said Oblonsky. Having no clear idea what they were talking about, he wanted to confine himself to generalities. "The change is not in his external position," Countess Lidia Ivanovna said sternly, following with her eyes of love the figure of Alexey Alexandrovitch as he got up and crossed over to Landau. "His heart is changed. A new heart has been vouchsafed him, and I fear you don't fully appreciate the change that has taken place in him." "Oh, well, in general outlines I can conceive the change. We have always been friendly, and now," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, responding with a sympathetic glance to the expression of the countess, and mentally balancing the question with which of the two ministers she was most intimate, so as to know about which to ask her to speak for him. "The change that has taken place in him cannot lessen his love for his neighbors. On the contrary, that change can only intensify love in his heart. But I am afraid you do not understand me." "Won't you have some tea?" she said, with her eyes indicating the footman, who was handing round tea on a tray. "Not quite, countess. Of course his misfortune...." "Yes, a misfortune which has proved the highest happiness, when his heart was made new, was filled full of it," she said, gazing with eyes full of love at Stepan Arkadyevitch. "I do believe I might ask her to speak to both of them," thought Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Oh, of course, countess," he said, "but I imagine such changes are a matter so private that no one, even the most intimate friend, would care to speak of them." "On the contrary, we ought to speak freely and help one another." "Yes, undoubtedly so, but there is such a difference of convictions, and besides," said Oblonsky with a soft smile. "There can be no difference where it is a question of holy truth." "Oh, no, of course, but...." said Stepan Arkadyevitch, paused in confusion. He understood at last that they were talking of religion. "I fancy that he will fall asleep immediately," said Alexey Alexandrovitch in a whisper full of meaning, going up to Lidia Ivanovna. Stepan Arkadyevitch looked round. Landau was sitting at the window, leaning on his elbow in the back of his chair, his head drooping. Noticing that all eyes were turned on him, he raised his head and smiled a smile of childlike artlessness. "Don't take any notice," said Lidia Ivanovna, as she lightly moved a chair up for Alexey Alexandrovitch. "I have observed," she was beginning, when a footman came into the room with a letter. Lidia Ivanovna rapidly ran her eyes over the note, and excusing herself, wrote an answer with extraordinary rapidity, handed it to the man, and came back to the table. "I have observed," she went on, "that Moscow people, especially the men, are more indifferent to religion than anyone." "Oh, no, countess. I thought Moscow people had the reputation of being the firmest in the faith," answered Stepan Arkadyevitch. "But as far as I can make out, you are unfortunately one of the indifferent ones," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, turning to him with a weary smile. "How anyone can be indifferent!" said Lidia Ivanovna. "I am not so much indifferent on that subject as I am waiting in suspense," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with his most deprecating smile. "I hardly think that the time for such questions has come yet for me." Alexey Alexandrovitch and Lidia Ivanovna looked at each other. "We can never tell whether the time has come for us or not," said Alexey Alexandrovitch severely. "We ought not to think whether we are ready or not ready. God's grace is not guided by human considerations. Sometimes it comes not to those who strive for it, and it comes to those that are unprepared, like Saul." "No, I believe it won't be just yet," said Lidia Ivanovna, who had been meanwhile watching the movements of the Frenchmen. Landau got up and came to them. "Do you allow me to listen?" he asked. "Oh, yes. I did not want to disturb you," said Lidia Ivanovna, gazing tenderly at him. "Sit here with us." "One has only not to close one's eyes to shut out the light," Alexey Alexandrovitch went on. "Ah, if you knew the happiness we know, feeling his presence ever in our hearts," said Countess Lidia Ivanovna, with a rapturous smile. "But a man may feel himself unworthy sometimes to rise to that height," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, conscious of hypocrisy in admitting this religious height, but at the same time unable to bring himself to acknowledge his free‐thinking views before a person who, by a single word to Pomorsky, might procure him the coveted appointment. "That is, you mean that sin keeps him back," said Lidia Ivanovna. "But that is a false idea. There is no sin for believers. Their sin has been atoned for. Pardon," she added, looking at the footman, who came in again with another letter. She read it and gave a verbal answer. "Tomorrow at the Grand Duchess's, say. For the believer's sin is not," she went on. "Yes, but faith without works is dead," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, recalling the phrase from the catechism, and only by his smile clinging to his independence. "There you have it, from the Epistle of St. James," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, addressing Lidia Ivanovna with a certain reproachfulness in his tone. It was unmistakably a subject they had discussed more than once before. "What harm has been done by the false interpretation of that passage? Nothing holds men back from belief like that misinterpretation. 'I have not works, so I cannot believe,' though all the while that is not said, but the very opposite is said." "Striving for God, saving the soul by fasting," said Countess Lidia Ivanovna, with disgusted contempt. "Those are the crude ideas of our monks. Yet that is nowhere said. It is far simpler and easier," she said, looking at Oblonsky with the same encouraging smile with which at court she encouraged youthful maids of honor, disconcerted by the new surroundings of the court. "We are saved by Christ who suffered for us. We are saved by faith," Alexey Alexandrovitch chimed in, with a glance of approval at her words. "Vous comprenez l'anglais?" asked Lidia Ivanovna, and receiving a reply in the affirmative, she got up and began looking through a shelf of books. "I want him to read 'Safe and Happy,' or 'Under the Wing,'" she said, looking inquiringly at Karenin. And finding the book and sitting down again in her place, she opened it. "It's very short. In it is described the way by which faith can be reached, and the happiness, above all earthly bliss, with which it fills the soul. The believer cannot be unhappy because he is not alone. But you will see." She was just settling herself to read when the footman came in again. "Madame Borozdina, tell her tomorrow at 2:00. Yes," she said, putting her finger in the place in the book, and gazing before her with her fine pensive eyes. "That is how true faith acts. You know Marie Sanina? You know about her trouble? She lost her only child. She was in despair. And what happened? She found this comforter, and she thanks God now for the death of her child. Such is the happiness faith brings." "Oh, yes, that is most," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, glad they were going to read, and let him have a chance to collect his faculties. "No, I see I'd better not ask her about anything today," he thought. "If only I can get out of this without putting my foot in it." "It will be dull for you," said Countess Lidia Ivanovna, addressing Landau. "You don't know English, but it's short." "Oh, I shall understand," said Landau with the same smile, and he closed his eyes. Alexey Alexandrovitch and Lidia Ivanovna exchanged meaningful glances, and the reading began. Chapter 22. Of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Stepan Arkadyevitch felt completely nonplussed by the strange talk which he was hearing for the first time. The complexity of Petersburg, as a rule, had a stimulating effect on him, rousing him out of his Moscow stagnation. But he liked these complications, and he understood them only in the circles he knew and was at home in. In these unfamiliar surroundings he was puzzled and disconcerted, and could not get his bearings. As he listened to Countess Lidia Ivanovna, aware of the beautiful, artless, or perhaps artful, he could not decide which, eyes of Landau fixed upon him, Stepan Arkadyevitch began to be conscious of a peculiar heaviness in his head. The most incongruous ideas were in confusion in his head. Marie Sanina is glad her child's dead. How good a smoke would be now! To be saved one only needs to believe, and the monks don't know how the thing's to be done, but Countess Lidia Ivanovna does know. And why is my head so heavy? Is it the cognac or all this being so queer? Anyway, I fancy I've done nothing unsuitable so far. But anyway, it won't do to ask her now. They say they make one say one's prayers. I only hope they won't make me. That'll be too imbecile. And what stuff is it she's reading? But she has a good accent. Landau, Bezzubov. What's he Bezzubov for? All at once Stepan Arkadyevitch became aware that his lower jaw was uncontrollably forming a yawn. He pulled his whiskers to cover the yawn and shook himself together. But soon after he became aware that he was dropping asleep and on the very point of snoring. He recovered himself at the very moment when the voice of Countess Lidia Ivanovna was saying, "He's asleep." Stepan Arkadyevitch started with dismay, feeling guilty and caught, but he was reassured at once by seeing that the words, "He's asleep," referred not to him, but to Landau. The Frenchman was asleep, as well as Stepan Arkadyevitch, but Stepan Arkadyevitch's being asleep would have offended them, as he thought, though even this he thought might not be so, as everything seemed so queer, while Landau's being asleep delighted them extremely, especially Countess Lidia Ivanovna. "Mon ami," said Lidia Ivanovna, carefully holding the folds of her silk gown so as not to rustle, and in her excitement calling Karenin not Alexey Alexandrovitch but mon ami. "Donnez-lui la main, vous voyez?" "Shh!" she hissed at the footman as he came in again. "Not at home." The Frenchman was asleep, or pretending to be asleep, with his head on the back of his chair, and his moist hand, as it lay on his knee, made faint movements, as though trying to catch something. Alexey Alexandrovitch got up, tried to move carefully, but stumbled against the table, went up and laid his hand on the Frenchman's hand. Stepan Arkadyevitch got up too, and opening his eyes wide, trying to wake himself up as if he were asleep, he looked first at one and then at the other. It was all real. Stepan Arkadyevitch felt that his head was getting worse and worse. "Que la personne qui est arrivée la dernière, celle qui demande, qu'elle sorte, qu'elle sorte," articulated the Frenchman, without opening his eyes. "Vous m'excuserez, mais vous voyez, revenez vers 10 heures, encore mieux demain." "Qu'elle sorte," repeated the Frenchman impatiently. "C'est moi, n'est-ce pas?" And receiving an answer in the affirmative, Stepan Arkadyevitch, forgetting the favor he had meant to ask of Lidia Ivanovna, and forgetting his sister's affairs, caring for nothing, but filled with the sole desire to get away as soon as possible, went out on tiptoe and ran out into the street as though from a plague-stricken house. For a long while he chatted and joked with his cab driver, trying to recover his spirits. At the French theatre where he arrived for the last act, and afterwards at the Tartar restaurant, after his champagne, Stepan Arkadyevitch felt a little refreshed in the atmosphere he was used to, but still he felt quite unlike himself all that evening. On getting home to Pyotr Oblonsky's, where he was staying, Stepan Arkadyevitch found a note from Betsy. She wrote to him that she was very anxious to finish their interrupted conversation, and begged him to come next day. He had scarcely read this note, and frowned at its contents, when he heard below the ponderous tramp of the servants, carrying something heavy. Stepan Arkadyevitch went out to look. It was the rejuvenated Pyotr Oblonsky. He was so drunk that he could not walk upstairs, but he told them to set him on his legs when he saw Stepan Arkadyevitch, and clinging to him, walked with him into his room, and there began telling him how he had spent the evening, and fell asleep doing so. Stepan Arkadyevitch was in very low spirits, which happened rarely with him, and for a long while he could not go to sleep. Everything he could recall to his mind, everything was disgusting, but most disgusting of all, as if it were something shameful, was the memory of the evening he had spent at Countess Lidia Ivanovna's. Next day he received from Alexey Alexandrovitch a final answer, refusing to grant Anna's divorce, and he understood that this decision was based on what the Frenchman had said in his real or pretended trance. Chapter 23 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. In order to carry through any undertaking in family life, there must necessarily be either complete division between husband and wife, or loving agreement. When the relations of a couple are vacillating, and neither one thing nor the other, no sort of enterprise can be undertaken. Many families remain for years in the same place, though both husband and wife are sick of it, simply because there is neither complete division nor agreement between them. Both Vronsky and Anna felt life in Moscow insupportable in the heat and dust, when the spring sunshine was followed by the glare of summer, and all the trees in the boulevards had long since been in full leaf, and the leaves were covered with dust. But they did not go back to Vozdvizhenskoe, as they had arranged to do long before. They went on staying in Moscow, though they both loathed it, because of late there had been no agreement between them. The irritability that kept them apart had no external cause, and all efforts to come to an understanding intensified it instead of removing it. It was an inner irritation, grounded in her mind on the conviction that his love had grown less, in his, on regret that he had put himself for her sake in a difficult position, which she, instead of lightening, made still more difficult. Neither of them gave full utterance to their sense of grievance, but they considered each other in the wrong, and tried on every pretext to prove this to one another. In her eyes, the whole of him, with all his habits, ideas, desires, with all his spiritual and physical temperament, was one thing, love for women, and that love, she felt, ought to be entirely concentrated on her alone. That love was less, consequently, as she reasoned, he must have transferred part of his love to other women or to another woman, and she was jealous. She was jealous not of any particular woman, but of the decrease of his love. Not having got an object for her jealousy, she was on the lookout for it. At the slightest hint she transferred her jealousy from one object to another. At one time she was jealous of those low women with which he might so easily renew his old bachelor ties. Then she was jealous of the society women he might meet. Then she was jealous of the imaginary girl whom he might want to marry, for whose sake he would break with her. And this last form of jealousy tortured her most of all, especially as he had unwarily told her, in a moment of frankness, that his mother knew him so little that she had had the audacity to try and persuade him to marry the young Princess Sorokina. And being jealous of him, Anna was indignant against him and found grounds for indignation in everything. For everything that was difficult in her position she blamed him. The agonizing condition of suspense she had passed in Moscow, the tardiness and indecision of Alexey Alexandrovitch, her solitude, she put it all down to him. If he had loved her, he would have seen all the bitterness of her position and would have rescued her from it. For her being in Moscow and not in the country, he was to blame too. He could not live buried in the country as she would have liked to do. He must have society, and he put her in this awful position, the bitterness of which he would not see. And again it was his fault that she was forever separated from her son. Even the rare moments of tenderness that came from time to time did not soothe her. In his tenderness now she saw a shade of complacency or self-confidence which had not been of old, and which exasperated her. It was dusk. Anna was alone and waiting for him to come back from a bachelor dinner. She walked up and down in his study, the room where the noise from the street was least heard, and thought over every detail of their yesterday's quarrel. Going back from the well-remembered, offensive words of the quarrel to what had been the ground of it, she arrived at last at its origin. For a long while she could hardly believe that their dissension had arisen from a conversation so inoffensive, of so little moment to either. But so it actually had been. It all arose from his laughing at the girls' high schools, declaring they were useless, while she defended them. He had spoken slightingly of women's education in general, and had said that Hannah, Anna's English protégée, had not the slightest need to know anything of physics. This irritated Anna. She saw in this a contemptuous reference to her own occupations, and she bethought her of a phrase to pay him back for the pain he had given her. "I don't expect you to understand me, my feelings, as anyone who loved me might, but simple delicacy I did expect," she said. And he had actually flushed with vexation and had said something unpleasant. She could not recall her answer, but at that point, with an unmistakable desire to wound her too, he had said, "I feel no interest in your infatuation over this girl, that's true, because I see it's unnatural." The cruelty with which he shattered the world she had built up for herself so laboriously to enable her to endure her hard life, the injustice with which he had accused her of affectation, of artificiality, aroused her. "I am very sorry that nothing but what's coarse and material is comprehensible and natural to you," she said, and walked out of the room. When he had come in to her yesterday evening, they had not referred to the quarrel, but both felt that the quarrel had been smoothed over, but was not at an end. Today he had not been home all day, and she felt so lonely and wretched in being on bad terms with him that she wanted to forget it all, to forgive him and be reconciled with him. She wanted to throw the blame on herself and to justify him. "I am myself to blame. I am irritable. I'm insanely jealous. I will make it up with him, and we'll go away to the country. There I shall be more at peace." Unnatural. She suddenly recalled the word that had stung her most of all, not so much the word itself, as the intent to wound her with which it was said. "I know what he meant. He meant unnatural, not loving my own daughter, to love another person's child. What does he know of love for children, of my love for Seryozha, whom I've sacrificed for him? But that wish to wound me! No, he loves another woman. It must be so." And perceiving that, while trying to regain her peace of mind, she had gone round the same circle that she had been round so often before, and had come back to her former state of exasperation, she was horrified at herself. "Can it be impossible? Can it be beyond me to control myself?" she said to herself, and began again from the beginning. "He's truthful, he's honest, he loves me, I love him, and in a few days the divorce will come. What more do I want? I want peace of mind and trust, and I will take the blame on myself. Yes, now when he comes in, I will tell him I was wrong, though I was not wrong, and we will go away tomorrow." And to escape thinking any more and being overcome by irritability, she rang and ordered the boxes to be brought up for packing their things for the country. At 10 o'clock Vronsky came in. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Anna Karenina, Book 7, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. "Well, was it nice?" she asked, coming out to meet him with a penitent and meek expression. "Just as usual," he answered, seeing at a glance that she was in one of her good moods. He was used by now to these transitions, and he was particularly glad to see it today, as he was in a specially good humor himself. What do I see? Come, that's good," he said, pointing to the boxes in the passage. "Yes, we must go. I went out for a drive, and it was so fine I longed to be in the country. There's nothing to keep you, is there?" "It's the one thing I desire. I'll be back directly, and we'll talk it over. I want only to change my coat. Order some tea." And he went into his room. There was something mortifying in the way he had said, "Come, that's good," as one says to a child when it leaves off being naughty, and still more mortifying was the contrast between her penitent and his self‐confident tone. And for one instant she felt the lust of strife rising up in her again. But making an effort, she conquered it and met Vronsky as good‐humoredly as before. When he came in, she told him, partly repeating phrases she had prepared beforehand, how she had spent the day and her plans for going away. "You know, it came to me almost like an inspiration," she said. "Why wait here for the divorce? Won't it be just the same in the country? I can't wait any longer. I don't want to go on hoping. I don't want to hear anything about the divorce. I have made up my mind it shall not have any more influence on my life. Do you agree?" "Oh, yes," he said, glancing uneasily at her excited face. "What did you do? Who was there?" she said after a pause. Vronsky mentioned the names of the guests. "The dinner was first rate, and the boat race, and it was all pleasant enough. But in Moscow they can never do anything without something ridicule. A lady of a sort appeared on the scene, a teacher of swimming to the Queen of Sweden, and gave us an exhibition of her skill." "How? Did she swim?" asked Anna, frowning. "In an absurd red costume de nation. She was old and hideous too. So when shall we go?" "What an absurd fancy! Why, did she swim in some special way then?" said Anna, not answering. "There was absolutely nothing in it. That's just what I say. It was awfully stupid. Well, then, when do you think of going?" Anna shook her head as though trying to drive away some unpleasant idea. "When? Why, the sooner the better. By tomorrow we shan't be ready. The day after tomorrow." "Yes. Oh, no. Wait a minute. The day after tomorrow's Sunday. I have to be at maman's," said Vronsky, embarrassed because as soon as he uttered his mother's name he was aware of her intent, suspicious eyes. His embarrassment confirmed her suspicion. She flushed hotly and drew away from him. It was now not the Queen of Sweden's swimming mistress who filled Anna's imagination, but the young Princess Sorokina. She was staying in a village near Moscow with Countess Vronskaya. "Can't you go tomorrow?" she said. "Well, no. The deeds and the money for the business I am going there for I can't get by tomorrow," he answered. "If so, we won't go at all." "But why so?" "I shall not go later. Monday or never." "What for?" said Vronsky, as though in amazement. "Why, there's no meaning in it." "There's no meaning in it to you, because you care nothing for me. You don't care to understand my life. The one thing that I cared for here was Hannah. You say it's affectation. Why, you said yesterday that I don't love my daughter, that I love this English girl, that it's unnatural. I should like to know what life there is for me that could be natural." For an instant she had a clear vision of what she was doing, and was horrified at how she had fallen away from her resolution. But even though she knew it was her own ruin, she could not restrain herself, could not keep herself from proving to him that he was wrong, could not give way to him. "I never said that. I said I did not sympathize with this sudden passion." "How is it, though you boast of your straightforwardness, you don't tell the truth?" "I never boast, and I never tell lies," he said slowly, restraining his rising anger. "It's a great pity if you can't respect—" "Respect was invented to cover the empty place where love should be. And if you don't love me any more, it would be better and more honest to say so." "No, this is becoming unbearable!" cried Vronsky, getting up from his chair and stopping short. Facing her, he said deliberately, "What do you try my patience for?" looking as though he might have said much more, but was restraining himself. "It has limits." "What do you mean by that?" she cried, looking with terror at the undisguised hatred in his whole face, and especially in his cruel, menacing eyes. "I mean to say," he was beginning, But he checked himself. "I must ask what it is you want of me." "What can I want? All I can want is that you should not desert me, as you think of doing," she said, understanding all he had not uttered. "But that I don't want, that's secondary. I want love, and there is none. So then all is over." She turned towards the door. "Stop, stop!" said Vronsky, with no change in the gloomy lines of his brows, though he held her by the hand. "What is it all about? I said that we must put off going for 3 days, and on that you told me I was lying, that I was not an honorable man." "Yes, and I repeat that the man who reproaches me with having sacrificed everything for me," she said, recalling the words of a still earlier quarrel, "that he's worse than a dishonorable man. He's a heartless man." "Oh, there are limits to endurance!" he cried, and hastily let go her hand. "He hates me, that's clear," she thought, and in silence, without looking round, she walked with faltering steps out of the room. "He loves another woman, that's even clearer," she said to herself as she went into her own room. "I want love, and there is none. So, then, all is over." She repeated the words she had said, "and it must be ended." But how? she asked herself, and she sat down in a low chair before the looking-glass. Thoughts of where she would go now, whether to the aunt who had brought her up, to Dolly, or simply alone abroad, and of what he was doing now alone in his study, whether this was the final quarrel, or whether reconciliation were still possible, and of what her old friends at Petersburg would say of her now, and how Alexey Alexandrovitch would look at it, and many other ideas of what would happen now after this rupture, came into her head, but she did not give herself up to them with all her heart. At the bottom of her heart was some obscure idea that alone interested her, but she could not get clear sight of it. Thinking once more of Alexey Alexandrovitch, she recalled the time of her illness after her confinement, and the feeling which never left her at that time. "Why didn't I die?" And the words and the feeling of that time came back to her. And all at once she knew what was in her soul. Yes, it was that idea which alone solved all. "Yes, to die. And the shame and disgrace of Alexey Alexandrovitch and of Seryozha, and my awful shame, it will all be saved by death. To die. And he will feel remorse, will be sorry, will love me. He will suffer on my account." With a trace of a smile of commiseration for herself, she sat down in the armchair, taking off and putting on the rings on her left hand, vividly picturing from different sides his feelings after her death. Approaching footsteps, his footsteps, distracted her attention. As though absorbed in the arrangement of her rings, she did not even turn to him. He went up to her, and taking her by the hand, said softly, "Anna, we'll go the day after tomorrow, if you like. I agree to everything." She did not speak. "What is it?" he urged. "You know," she said, and at the same instant, unable to restrain herself any longer, burst into sobs. "Cast me off," she articulated between her sobs. "I'll go away tomorrow. I'll do more. What am I? An immoral woman, a stone round your neck. I don't want to make you wretched. I don't want to. I'll set you free. You don't love me. You love someone else." Vronsky besought her to be calm, and declared that there was no trace of foundation for her jealousy, that he had never ceased and never would cease to love her, that he loved her more than ever. "Anna, why distress yourself and me so?" he said to her, kissing her hands. There was tenderness now in his face, and she fancied she caught the sound of tears in his voice, and she felt them wet on her hand. And instantly Anna's despairing jealousy changed into a despairing passion of tenderness. She put her arms round him and covered with kisses his head, his neck, his hands. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Feeling that the reconciliation was complete, Anna set eagerly to work in the morning preparing for their departure. Though it was not settled whether they should go on Monday or Tuesday, as they had each given way to the other, Anna packed busily, feeling absolutely indifferent whether they went a day earlier or later. She was standing in her room over an open box, taking things out of it, when he came in to see her earlier than usual, dressed to go out. "I'm going off at once to see maman. She can send me the money by Yegorov, and I shall be ready to go tomorrow," he said. Though she was in such a good mood, the thought of his visit to his mother's gave her a pang. "No, I shan't be ready by then myself," she said, and at once reflected. So then it was possible to arrange to do as I wished. "No, do as you meant to do. Go into the dining room. I'm coming there directly. It's only to turn out these things that aren't wanted," she said, putting something more on the heap of frippery that lay in Annushka's arms. Vronsky was eating his beefsteak when she came into the dining room. "You wouldn't believe how distasteful these rooms have become to me," she said, sitting down beside him to her coffee. "There's nothing more awful than these chambres garnies. There's no individuality in them, no soul. These clocks and curtains, and worst of all the wallpapers, they're a nightmare. I think of Vozdvizhenskoe as the promised land. You're not sending the horses off yet?" "No, they will come after us. Where are you going to?" "I wanted to go to Wilson's to take some dresses to her. So it's really to be tomorrow," she said in a cheerful voice, but suddenly her face changed. Vronsky's valet came in to ask him to sign a receipt for a telegram from Petersburg. There was nothing out of the way in Vronsky's getting a telegram, but he said, as though anxious to conceal something for her, that the receipt was in his study, and he turned hurriedly to her. "By tomorrow, without fail, I will finish it all." "But from whom is the telegram?" she asked, not hearing him. "From Stiva," he answered reluctantly. "Why didn't you show it to me? What secret can there be between Stiva and me?" Vronsky called the valet back and told him to bring the telegram. "I didn't want to show it to you, because Stiva has such a passion for telegraphing. Why telegraph when nothing's settled?" "About the divorce?" "Yes, but he says he has not been able to come to anything yet. He has promised a decisive answer in a day or two. But here it is. Read it." With trembling hands Anna took the telegram and read what Vronsky had told her. At the end was added, "Little hope, but I will do everything possible and impossible." "I said yesterday that it's absolutely nothing to me when I get it, or whether I never get, a divorce," she said, flushing crimson. "There was not the slightest necessity to hide it from me. So he may hide and does hide his correspondence with women from me," she thought. "Yashvin meant to come this morning with Voytov," said Vronsky. "I believe he's won from Pyeztsov all and more that he can pay, about 60,000." "No," she said, irritated by his so obviously showing by this change of subject that he was irritated. "Why do you suppose that this news would affect me so, that you must even try to hide it? I said I did not want to consider it, and I should have liked you to care as little about it as I do." "I care about it because I like definiteness," he said. "Definiteness is not in the form, but the love," she said, more and more irritated, not by his words, but by the tone of cool composure in which he spoke. "What do you want it for?" "My God, love again!" he thought, frowning. "Oh, you know what for your sake and your children's in the future." "There won't be any children in the future." "That's a great pity," he said. "You want it for the children's sake, but you don't think of me," she said, quite forgetting or not having heard that he said "for your sake" and the children's. The question of the possibility of having children had long been a subject of dispute and irritation to her. His desire to have children she interpreted as proof he did not prize her beauty. "Oh, I said for your sake. Above all for your sake," he repeated, frowning as though in pain, "because I am certain that the greater part of your irritability comes from the indefiniteness of the position." "Yes, now he has laid aside all pretense, and all his cold hatred for me is apparent," she thought, not hearing his words, but watching with terror the cold, cruel judge who looked mocking her out of his eyes. "The cause is not that," she said, "and, indeed, I don't see how the cause of my irritability, as you call it, can be that I am completely in your power. What indefiniteness is there in the position? On the contrary—" "I am very sorry that you don't care to understand," he interrupted, obstinately angry to give utterance to his thought. "The indefiniteness consists in your imagining that I am free." "On that score you can set your mind quite at rest," she said, and turning away from him, she began drinking her coffee. She lifted her cup with her little finger held apart, and put it to her lips. After drinking a few sips, she glanced at him, and by his expression she saw clearly that he was repelled by her hand and her gesture and the sound made by her lips. "I don't care in the least what your mother thinks, and what match she wants to make for you," she said, putting the cup down with a shaking hand. "But we are not talking about that." "Yes, that's just what we are talking about. And let me tell you that a heartless woman, whether she's old or not old, your mother or anyone else, is of no consequence to me, and I would not consent to know her." "Anna, I beg you not to speak disrespectfully of my mother." "A woman whose heart does not tell her where her son's happiness and honor lie has no heart." "I repeat my request that you will not speak disrespectfully of my mother, whom I respect," he said, raising his voice and looking sternly at her. She did not answer. Looking intently at him, at his face, his hands, she recalled all the details of their reconciliation the previous day, and his passionate caresses. "There, just such caresses he has lavished, and will lavish, and longs to lavish, on other women," she thought. "You don't love your mother, that's all talk and talk and talk," she said, looking at him with hatred in her eyes. "Even so, you must—" "Must decide, and I have decided," she said, and she would have gone away, but at that moment Yashvin walked into the room. Anna greeted him and remained. Why, when there was a tempest in her soul, and she felt she was standing at a turning point in her life, which might have fearful consequences, why, at that minute, she had to keep up appearances before an outsider, who sooner or later must know it all, she did not know. But at once quelling the storm within her, she sat down and began talking to their guest. "Well, and how are you getting on? Has your debt been paid you?" she asked Yashvin. "Oh, pretty fair. I fancy I shan't get it all, but I shall get a good half. And when are you off?" said Yashvin, looking at Vronsky, and unmistakably guessing at a quarrel. "The day after tomorrow, I think," said Vronsky. "You've been meaning to go so long, though." "But now it's quite decided," said Anna, looking Vronsky straight in the face with a look which told him not to dream of the possibility of reconciliation. "Don't you feel sorry for that unlucky Pyezov?" she went on, talking to Yashvin. "I've never asked myself the question, Anna Arkadyevna, whether I'm sorry for him or not. You see, all my fortune's here," he touched his breast pocket, "and just now I'm a wealthy man. But today I'm going to the club, and I may come out a beggar. You see, whoever sits down to play with me, he wants to leave me without a shirt to my back, and so do I him. And so we fight it out, and that's the pleasure of it." "Well, but suppose you were married," said Anna. "How would it be for your wife?" Yashvin laughed. "That's why I'm not married, and never mean to be." "And Helsingfors?" said Vronsky, entering into the conversation and glancing at Anna's smiling face. Meeting his eyes, Anna's face instantly took a coldly severe expression, as though she were saying to him, "It's not forgotten. It's all the same." "Were you really in love?" she said to Yashvin. "Oh, heavens, ever so many times. But you see, some men come to play, but only so that they can always lay down their cards when the hour of a rendezvous comes, while I take up love only so as to not be late for my cards in the evening. That's how I manage things." "No, I didn't mean that, but the real thing," she would have said Helsingfors, but would not repeat the word used by Vronsky. Voytov, who was buying the horse, came in. Anna got up and went out of the room. Before leaving the house, Vronsky went into her room. She would have pretended to be looking for something on the table, but ashamed of making a pretense, she looked straight in his face with cold eyes. "What do you want?" she asked in French. "To get the guarantee for Gambetta. I've sold him," he said in a tone which said more clearly than words, "I've no time for discussing things, and it would lead to nothing." I'm not to blame in any way, he thought. If she will punish herself, tant pis pour elle. But as he was going he fancied that she said something, and his heart suddenly ached with pity for her. "Eh, Anna?" he queried. "I said nothing," she answered just as coldly and calmly. "Oh, nothing. Tant pis then," he thought, feeling cold again, and he turned and went out. As he was going out he caught a glimpse in the looking-glass of her face, white with quivering lips. He even wanted to stop and say some comforting word to her, but his legs carried him out of the room before he could think what to say. The whole of that day he spent away from home, and when he came late in the evening the maid told him that Anna Arkadyevna had a headache and begged him not to go in to her. Chapter 26 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Never before had a day been passed in quarrel. Today was the first time. And this was not a quarrel. It was the open acknowledgment of complete coldness. Was it possible to glance at her as he had glanced when he came into the room for the guarantee? To look at her, see her heart was breaking with despair, and go out without a word with that face of callous composure? He was not merely cold to her. He hated her because he loved another woman. That was clear. And remembering all the cruel words he had said, Anna supplied, too, the words that he had unmistakably wished to say and could have said to her, and she grew more and more exasperated. "I won't prevent you," he might say. "You can go where you like. You were unwilling to be divorced from your husband, no doubt so that you might go back to him. Go back to him. If you want money, I'll give it to you. How many roubles do you want?" All the most cruel words that a brutal man could say, he had said to her in her imagination, and she could not forgive him for them, as though he had actually said them. "But didn't he only yesterday swear he loved me? He, a truthful and sincere man? Haven't I despaired for nothing many times already?" she said to herself afterwards. All that day, except for the visit to Wilson's, which occupied 2 hours, Anna spent in doubts whether everything were over or whether there were still hope of reconciliation, whether she should go away at once or see him once more. She was expecting him the whole day, and in the evening, as she went to her own room, leaving a message for him that her head ached, she said to herself, "If he comes in spite of what the maid says, it means that he loves me still. If not, it means that it's all over, and then I will decide what I'm to do." In the evening she heard the rumbling of his carriage stop at the entrance, his ring, his steps, and his conversation with the servant. He believed what was told him, did not care to find out more, and went to his own room. So then, everything was over. And death rose clearly and vividly before her mind as the sole means of bringing back love for her in his heart, of punishing him, and of gaining the victory in that strife which the evil spirit in possession of her heart was waging with him. Nothing now mattered. Going or not going to Vozdvizhenskoe, getting or not getting a divorce from her husband, all of that did not matter. The one thing that mattered was punishing him. When she poured herself out her usual dose of opium, and thought that she had only to drink off the whole bottle to die, it seemed to her so simple and easy, that she began musing with enjoyment on how he would suffer, and repent, and love her memory when it would be too late. She lay in bed with open eyes, by the light of a single burned-down candle, gazing at the carved cornice of the ceiling and at the shadow of the screen that covered part of it, while she vividly pictured to herself how he would feel when she would be no more, when she would be only a memory to him. "How could I say such cruel things to her?" he would say. "How could I go out of the room without saying anything to her? But now she is no more. She has gone away from us, forever. She is—" Suddenly the shadow of the screen wavered, pounced on the whole cornice, the whole ceiling. Other shadows from the other side swooped to meet it, For an instant shadows flitted back, but then with fresh swiftness they darted forward, wavered, commingled, and all was darkness. Death, she thought, and such horror came upon her that for a long while she could not realize where she was, and for a long while her trembling hands could not find the matches and light another candle, instead of the one that had burned down and gone out. "No, anything, only to live. Why, I love him. Why, he loves me. This has been before and will pass," she said, feeling that tears of joy at the return to life were trickling down her cheeks, and to escape from her panic she went hurriedly to his room. He was asleep there, and sleeping soundly. She went up to him, and holding the light above his face, she gazed a long while at him. Now, when he was asleep, she loved him so that at the sight of him she could not keep back tears of tenderness. But she knew that if he waked up he would look at her with cold eyes, convinced that he was right, and that before telling him of her love, she would have to prove to him that he had been wrong in his treatment of her. Without waking him, she went back, and after a second dose of opium she fell towards morning into a heavy, incomplete sleep, during which she never quite lost consciousness. In the morning she was waked by a horrible nightmare, which had recurred several times in her dreams, even before her connection with Vronsky. A little old man with unkempt beard was doing something bent down over some iron, muttering meaningless French words, and she, as she always did in this nightmare, it was what made the horror of it, felt that this peasant was taking no notice of her, but was doing something horrible with the iron over her, and she waked up in a cold sweat. When she got up the previous day came back to her as though veiled in mist. "There was a quarrel, just what has happened several times. I said I had a headache, and he did not come to see me. Tomorrow we're going away. I must see him and get ready for the journey," she said to herself, and learning that he was in his study she went down to him. As she passed through the drawing-room she heard a carriage stop at the entrance, and looking out of the window she saw the carriage, from which a young girl in a lilac hat was leaning out, giving some directions to the footman ringing the bell. After a parley in the hall, someone came upstairs, and Vronsky's steps could be heard passing the drawing-room. He went rapidly downstairs. Anna went again to the window. She saw him come out onto the steps without his hat and go up to the carriage. The young girl in the lilac hat handed him a parcel. Vronsky, smiling, said something to her. The carriage drove away. He ran rapidly upstairs again. The mist that had shrouded everything in her soul parted suddenly. The feelings of yesterday pierced the sick heart with a fresh pang. She could not understand now how she could have lowered herself by spending a whole day with him in his house. She went into his room to announce her determination. "That was Madame Sorokina and her daughter. They came and brought me the money and the deeds from maman. I couldn't get them yesterday. How is your head? Better?" he said quietly, not wishing to see and to understand the gloomy and solemn expression of her face. She looked silently, intently at him, standing in the middle of the room. He glanced at her, frowned for a moment, and went on reading a letter. She turned and went deliberately out of the room. He still might have turned her back, but she had reached the door. He was still silent, and the only sound audible was the rustling of the notepaper as he turned it. "Oh, by the way," he said at the very moment she was in the doorway, "we're going tomorrow for certain, aren't we?" "You, but not I," she said, turning round to him. "Anna, we can't go on like this." "You, but not I," she repeated. "This is getting unbearable." You will be sorry for this," she said, and went out. Frightened by the desperate expression with which these words were uttered, he jumped up and would have run after her, but on second thoughts he sat down and scowled, setting his teeth. This vulgar, as he thought it, threat of something vague exasperated him. "I've tried everything," he thought. "The only thing left is not to pay attention." And he began to get ready to drive into town, and again to his mother's, to get her signature to the deeds. She heard the sound of his steps about the study and the dining room. At the drawing-room he stood still. But he did not turn in to see her. He merely gave an order that the horse should be given to Voytov if he came while he was away. Then she heard the carriage brought round. The door opened, and he came out again. But he went back into the porch again, and someone was running upstairs. It was the valet running up for his gloves that had been forgotten. She went to the window, and saw him take the gloves without looking, and touching the coachman on the back he said something to him. Then, without looking up at the window, he settled himself in his usual attitude in the carriage, with his legs crossed, and drawing on his gloves, he vanished round the corner. Chapter 27 of Anna Karenina, Book 7, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. He is gone. It is over, Anna said to herself, standing at the window, and in answer to this statement the impression of the darkness when the candle had flickered out, and of her fearful dream mingling into one, filled her heart with cold terror. "No, that cannot be!" she cried. Crossing the room she rang the bell. She was so afraid now of being alone that without waiting for the servant to come in, she went out to meet him. "Inquire where the count has gone," she said. The servant answered that the count had gone to the stable. "His honor left word that if you cared to drive out, the carriage would be back immediately." "Very good. Wait a minute. I'll write a note at once. Send Mihail with the note to the stables. Make haste." She sat down and wrote: "I was wrong. Come back home. I must explain. For God's sake come. I'm afraid." She sealed it up and gave it to the servant. She was afraid of being left alone now. She followed the servant out of the room and went to the nursery. "Why, this isn't it. This isn't he. Where are his blue eyes, his sweet, shy smile?" was her first thought when she saw her chubby, rosy little girl with the black, curly hair instead of Seryozha, whom in the tangle of her ideas she had expected to see in the nursery. The little girl sitting at the table was obstinately and violently battering on it with a cork, and staring aimlessly at her mother with her pitch-black eyes. Answering the English nurse that she was quite well, that she was going to the country tomorrow, Anna sat down by the little girl and began spinning the cork to show her. But the child's loud, ringing laugh and the motion of her eyebrows recalled Vronsky so vividly that she got up hurriedly, restraining her sobs, and went away. "Can it all be over? No, it can't be," she thought. "He will come back. But how can he explain that smile, that excitement after he had been talking to her? But even if he doesn't explain, I will believe. If I don't believe, there's only one thing left for me, and I can't." She looked at her watch. 20 minutes had passed. By now he has received the note and is coming back. Not long. 10 minutes more. But what if he doesn't come? No, that cannot be. He mustn't see me with tear-stained eyes. I'll go and wash. Yes, yes. Did I do my hair or not? She asked herself, and she could not remember. She felt her head with her hand. Yes, my hair has been done, but when I did it I can't in the least remember. She could not believe the evidence of her hand, and went up to the pier-glass to see whether she really had done her hair. She certainly had, but she could not think when she had done it. "Who's that?" she thought, looking in the looking-glass at the swollen face with strangely glittering eyes that looked in a scared way at her. "Why, it's I!" she suddenly understood, and looking round, she seemed all at once to feel his kisses on her, and twitched her shoulders, shuddering. Then she lifted her hand up to her lips and kissed it. "What is it? Why, I'm going out of my mind!" And she went into her bedroom, where Annushka was tidying the room. "Annushka!" she said, coming to a standstill before her, and she stared at the maid, not knowing what to say to her. "You meant to go and see Darya Alexandrovna," said the girl, as though she understood. "Darya Alexandrovna?" "Yes, I'll go." 15 minutes there, 15 minutes back. He's coming. He'll be here soon." She took out her watch and looked at it. "But how could he go away, leaving me in such a state? How can he live, without making it up to me? She went to the window and began looking into the street. Judging by the time, he might be back now, but her calculations might be wrong, and she began once more to recall when he had started and to count the minutes. At the moment when she had moved away to the big clock to compare it with her watch, someone drove up. Glancing out of the window, she saw his carriage, but no one came upstairs, and voices could be heard below. It was the messenger who had come back in the carriage. She went down to him. "We didn't catch the count. The count had driven off on the lower city road." "What did you say? What?" she said to the rosy, good-humored Mihail, as he handed her back her note. "Why, then, he has never received it," she thought. "Go with this note to Countess Vronskaya's place, you know, and bring an answer back immediately," she said to the messenger. "And what am I going to do?" she thought. "Yes, I'm going to Dolly's. That's true, or else I shall go out of my mind. Yes, and I can telegraph too." And she wrote a telegram. "I absolutely must talk to you. Come at once." After sending off the telegram, she went to dress. When she was dressed and in her hat, she glanced again into the eyes of the plump, comfortable-looking Annushka. There was unmistakable sympathy in those good-natured little gray eyes. "Annushka dear, what am I to do?" said Anna, sobbing and sinking helplessly into a chair. "Why fret yourself so, Anna Arkadyevna? Why, there's nothing out of the way. You drive out a little, it'll cheer you up," said the maid. "Yes, I'm going," said Anna, rousing herself and getting up. "And if there's a telegram while I'm away, send it on to Darya Alexandrovna's. But no, I shall be back myself. Yes, I mustn't think. I must do something, drive somewhere, and most of all, get out of this house," she said, feeling with terror the strange turmoil going on in her own heart, and she made haste to go out and get into the carriage. "Where to?" asked Pyotr, before getting onto the box. "To Znamenka, the Oblonskys'." Chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. It was bright and sunny. A fine rain had been falling all morning, and now it had not long cleared up. The iron roofs, the flags of the roads, the flints of the pavement, the wheels and leather, the brass and the tin plate of the carriages, all glistened brightly in the May sunshine. It was 3 o'clock, and the very liveliest time in the streets. As she sat in the corner of the comfortable carriage, that hardly swayed on its supple springs, while the greys trotted swiftly, in the midst of the unceasing rattle of wheels and the changing impressions in the pure air, Anna ran over the events of the last days, and she saw her position quite differently from how it had seemed at home. Now the thought of death seemed no longer so terrible and so clear to her, and death itself no longer seemed so inevitable. Now she blamed herself for the humiliation to which she had lowered herself. "I entreat him to forgive me. I have given in to him. I have owned myself at fault. What for? Can't I live without him?" And leaving unanswered the question how she was going to live without him, she fell to reading the signs on the shops. "Office and warehouse. Dental surgeon. Yes, I'll tell Dolly all about it. She doesn't like Vronsky. I shall be sick and ashamed, but I'll tell her. She loves me, and I'll follow her advice. I won't give in to him. I won't let him train me as he pleases. Filipov, bun shop. They say they send their dough to Petersburg. The Moscow water is so good for it. Ah, the springs at Matishchen, and the pancakes." And she remembered how, long, long ago, when she was a girl of 17, she had gone with her Aunt Troitsa. "Riding, too. Was that really me, with red hands? How much that seemed to me then splendid and out of reach has become worthless, while what I had then has gone out of my reach forever. Could I ever have believed then that I could come to such humiliation? How conceited and self-satisfied he will be when he gets my note. But I will show him. How horrid that paint smells! Why is it they're always painting and building? Mode et robe, she read. A man bowed to her. It was Annushka's husband. Our parasites. She remembered how Vronsky had said that. Our? Why our? What's so awful is that one can't tear up the past by its roots. One can't tear it out, but one can hide one's memory of it, and I'll hide it. And then she thought of her past with Alexey Alexandrovitch, of how she had blotted the memory of it out of her life. Dolly will think I'm leaving my second husband, and so I certainly must be in the wrong. As if I care to be right! I can't help it," she said, and she wanted to cry, but at once she fell to wondering what those two girls could be smiling at. Love, most likely. They don't know how dreary it is, how low. The boulevard and the children. 3 boys running, playing at horses. Seryozha! And I'm losing everything and not getting him back. Yes, I'm losing everything, if he doesn't return. Perhaps he was late for the train and has come back by now. Longing for humiliation again, she said to herself. No, I'll go to Dolly and say straight out to her I'm unhappy, I deserve this, I'm to blame, but still I'm unhappy, help me. These horses, this carriage, how loathsome I am to myself in this carriage. All his, but I won't see them again. Thinking over the words in which she would tell Dolly, and mentally working her heart up to great bitterness, Anna went upstairs. "Is there anyone here?" she asked in the hall. "Katerina Alexandrovna Levin," answered the footman. Kitty, Kitty, whom Vronsky was in love with, thought Anna. The girl he thinks of with love. He's sorry he didn't marry her. But me he thinks of with hatred, and is sorry he had anything to do with me. The sisters were having a consultation about nursing when Anna called. Dolly went down alone to see the visitor who had interrupted their conversation. "Well, so you've not gone away yet? I meant to have come to you," she said. "I had a letter from Stiva today." "We had a telegram too," answered Anna, looking round for Kitty. "He writes that he can't make out quite what Alexey Alexandrovitch wants, but he won't go away without a decisive answer." "I thought you had someone with you. Can I see the letter?" "Yes, Kitty," said Dolly, embarrassed. "She stayed in the nursery. She has been very ill." "So I heard. May I see the letter?" "I'll get it directly, but he doesn't refuse. On the contrary, Stiva has hopes," said Dolly, stopping in the doorway. "I haven't, and indeed I don't wish it," said Anna. "What's this? Does Kitty consider it degrading to meet me?" thought Anna when she was alone. "Perhaps she's right too. But it's not for her, the girl who was in love with Vronsky, it's not for her to show me that, even if it is true. I know that in my position I can't be received by any decent woman. I knew that from the first moment I sacrificed everything to him. And this is my reward. Oh, how I hate him! What did I come here for? I'm worse here, more miserable." She heard from the next room the sisters' voices in consultation. "And what am I going to say to Dolly now? Amuse Kitty by the sight of my wretchedness? Submit to her patronizing? No, and besides, Dolly wouldn't understand, and it would be no good my telling her. It would only be interesting to see Kitty, to show her how I despise everyone and everything, and how nothing matters to me now." Dolly came in with the letter. Anna read it and handed it back in silence. "I knew all that," she said, "and it doesn't interest me in the least." "Oh, why so? On the contrary, I have hopes," said Dolly, looking inquisitively at Anna. She had never seen her in such a strangely irritable condition. "When are you going away?" she asked. Anna, half closing her eyes, looked straight before her and did not answer. "Why does Kitty shrink from me?" she said, looking at the door and flushing red. "Oh, what nonsense! She's nursing, and things aren't going right with her, and I've been advising her. She's delighted. She'll be here in a minute," said Dolly awkwardly, not clever at lying. "Yes, here she is." Hearing that Anna had called, Kitty had wanted not to appear, but Dolly persuaded her. Rallying her forces, Kitty went in, walked up to her, blushing, and shook hands. "I am so glad to see you," she said with a trembling voice. Kitty had been thrown into confusion by the inward conflict between her antagonism to this bad woman and her desire to be nice to her. But as soon as she saw Anna's lovely and attractive face, all feelings of antagonism disappeared. "I should not have been surprised if you had not cared to meet me. I'm used to everything. You have been ill?" "Yes, you are changed," said Anna. Kitty felt that Anna was looking at her with hostile eyes. She ascribed this hostility to the awkward position in which Anna, who had once patronized her, must feel with her now, and she felt sorry for her. They talked of Kitty's illness, of the baby, of Stiva, but it was obvious that nothing interested Anna. "I came to say good‐bye to you," she said, getting up. "Oh, when are you going?" But again not answering, Anna turned to Kitty. "Yes, I am very glad to have seen you," she said with a smile. "I have heard so much of you from everyone, even from your husband. He came to see me, and I liked him exceedingly," she said, unmistakably with malicious intent. "Where is he?" "He has gone back to the country," said Kitty, blushing. "Remember me to him. Be sure you do." "I'll be sure to," Kitty said naïvely, looking compassionately into her eyes. "So good‐bye, Dolly." And kissing Dolly and shaking hands with Kitty, Anna went off hurriedly. "She's just the same, and just as charming. She's very lovely," said Kitty when she was alone with her sister. "But there's something piteous about her, awfully piteous." "Yes, there's something unusual about her today," said Dolly. "When I went with her into the hall, I fancied she was almost crying." Chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. Anna got into the carriage again in an even worse frame of mind than when she set out from home. To her previous tortures was added now that sense of mortification and of being an outcast which she had felt so distinctly on meeting Kitty. "Where to? Home?" asked Pyotr. "Yes, home," she said, not even thinking now where she was going. "How they looked at me as something dreadful, incomprehensible, and curious. What can he be telling the other with such warmth?" she thought, staring at two men who walked by. "Can one ever tell anyone what one is feeling? I meant to tell Dolly, and it's a good thing I didn't tell her. How pleased she would have been at my misery! She would have concealed it, but her chief feeling would have been delight at my being punished for the happiness she envied me for. Kitty, she would have been even more pleased. How I can see through her! She knows I was more than usually sweet to her husband, and she's jealous and hates me, and she despises me. In her eyes I'm an immoral woman. If I were an immoral woman, I could have made her husband fall in love with me, if I'd cared to. And indeed, I did care to. There's someone who's pleased with himself," she thought, as she saw a fat, rubicund gentleman coming towards her. He took her for an acquaintance and lifted his glossy hat above his bald, glossy head, and then perceived his mistake. "He thought he knew me. Well, he knows me as well as anyone in the world knows me. I don't know myself. I know my appetites, as the French say. They want that dirty ice cream, that they do know for certain," she thought, looking at two boys stopping an ice cream seller, who took a barrel off his head and began wiping his perspiring face with a towel. "We all want what is sweet and nice. If not sweetmeats, then dirty ice, and Kitty's the same. If not Vronsky, then Levin. And she envies me and hates me, and we all hate each other. I Kitty, Kitty me. Yes, that's the truth. Tutkin coiffeur. Je me fais coiffer par Tutkin. I'll tell him that when he comes," she thought, and smiled. But the same instant she remembered that she had no one now to tell anything amusing to. "And there's nothing amusing, nothing mirthful, really. It's all hateful. They're singing for vespers, and how carefully that merchant crosses himself, as if he were afraid of missing something. Why these churches, and this singing, and this humbug? Simply to conceal that we all hate each other, like these cab drivers who are abusing each other so angrily. Yashvin says, he wants to strip me of my shirt, and I him of his. Yes, that's the truth." She was plunging in these thoughts, which so engrossed her that she left off thinking of her own position, when the carriage drew up at the steps of her house. It was only when she saw the porter running out to meet her that she remembered she had sent the note and the telegram. "Is there an answer?" she inquired. "I'll see this minute," answered the porter, and glancing into his room, he took out and gave her the thin square envelope of a telegram. "I can't come before 10 o'clock. Vronsky," she read. "And hasn't the messenger come back?" "No," answered the porter. "Then, since it's so, I know what I must do," she said, and feeling a vague fury and craving for revenge rising up within her, she ran upstairs. "I'll go to him myself. Before going away forever, I'll tell him all. Never have I hated anyone as I hate that man," she thought. Seeing his hat on the rack, she shuddered with aversion. She did not consider that his telegram was an answer to her telegram, and that he had not yet received her note. She pictured him to herself as talking calmly to his mother and Princess Sorokina, and rejoicing at her sufferings. "Yes, I must go quickly," she said, not knowing yet where she was going. She longed to get away as quickly as possible from the feelings she had gone through in that awful house. The servants, the walls, the things in that house, all aroused repulsion and hatred in her, and lay like a weight upon her. "Yes, I must go to the railway station, and if he's not there, then go there and catch him." Anna looked at the railway timetable in the newspapers. An evening train went at 8:02. "Yes, I shall be in time." She gave orders for the other horses to be put in the carriage, and packed in a travelling bag the things needed for a few days. She knew she would never come back here again. Among the plans that came into her head she vaguely determined that after what would happen at the station or at the countess's house, she would go as far as the first town on the Nizhny road and stop there. Dinner was on the table. She went up, but the smell of the bread and cheese was enough to make her feel that all food was disgusting. She ordered the carriage and went out. The horse threw a shadow now across the street, but it was a bright evening and still warm in the sunshine. Annushka, who came down with her things, and Pyotr, who put the things in the carriage, and the coachman, evidently out of humor, were all hateful to her and irritated her by their words and actions. "I don't want you, Pyotr." "But how about the ticket?" "Well, as you like, it doesn't matter," she said crossly. Pyotr jumped on the box, and putting his arms akimbo, told the coachman to drive to the booking office. Chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. "Here it is again. Again I understand it all," Anna said to herself, as soon as the carriage had started, and swaying lightly, rumbled over the tiny cobbles of the paved road, and again one impression followed rapidly upon another. "Yes, what was the last thing I thought of so clearly?" She tried to recall it. "Tutkin coiffure? No, not that. Yes, of what Yashvin says, the struggle for existence and hatred is the one thing that holds men together. No, it's a useless journey you're making," she said, and mentally addressing a party in a coach and four, evidently going for an excursion into the country. "And the dog you're taking with you will be no help to you. You can't get away from yourselves." Turning her eyes in the direction Pyotr had turned to look, she saw a factory hand almost dead drunk, with hanging head, being led away by a policeman. "Come, he's found a quicker way," she thought. "Count Vronsky and I did not find that happiness either, though we expected so much from it." And now for the first time Anna turned that glaring light in which she was seeing everything on to her relations with him, which she had hitherto avoided thinking about. What was it that he sought in me? Not love so much as the satisfaction of vanity. She remembered his words, the expression of his face, that recalled an abject setter dog in the early days of their connection, and everything now confirmed this. Yes, there was the triumph of success in him. Of course there was love too, but the chief element was the pride of success. He boasted of me. Now that's over. There's nothing to be proud of. Not to be proud of, but to be ashamed of. He has taken from me all he could, and now I am of no use to him. He is weary of me, and is trying not to be dishonorable in his behavior to me. He let that out yesterday. He wants divorce and marriage so as to burn his ships. He loves me, but how? The zest is gone, as the English say. That fellow wants everyone to admire him, and is very much pleased with himself," she said, looking at a red-faced clerk riding on a riding-school horse. "Yes, there's not the same flavour about me for him now. If I go away from him, at the bottom of his heart he will be glad." This was not mere supposition. She saw it distinctly in the piercing light, which revealed to her now the meaning of life and human relations. "My love keeps growing more passionate and egoistic, while his is waning and waning, and that's why we're drifting apart," she went on musing. "And there's no hope for it. He is everything for me, and I want him more and more to give himself up to me entirely, and he wants more and more to get away from me. We walked to meet each other up to the time of our love, and then we have been irresistibly drifting in different directions, and there's no altering that. He tells me I am insanely jealous, and I have told myself that I am insanely jealous. But it's not true. I'm not jealous, but I'm unsatisfied. But—" She opened her lips and shifted her place in the carriage in the excitement aroused by the thought that suddenly struck her. "If I could be anything but a mistress, passionately caring for nothing but his caresses. But I can't, and I don't care to be anything else. And by that desire I rouse aversion in him, and he rouses fury in me, and it cannot be different. Don't I know that he wouldn't deceive me, that he has no schemes about Princess Sorokina, that he's not in love with Kitty, that he won't desert me? I know all that, but it makes it no better for me. If without loving me, from duty he'll be good and kind to me, and without what I want, that's 1,000 times worse than unkindness, that's hell, and that's just how it is. For a long while now he hasn't loved me, and where love ends, hate begins. I don't know these streets at all. Hills, it seems, and still houses and houses. And in the houses always people and people. How many of them? No end, and all hating each other. Come, let me try to think what I want, to make me happy. Well, suppose I am divorced, and Alexey Alexandrovitch lets me have Seryozha, and I marry Vronsky." Thinking of Alexey Alexandrovitch, she at once pictured him with extraordinary vividness as though he were alive before her, with his mild, lifeless, dull eyes, the blue veins in his white hands, his intonations and the crackling of his fingers, and remembering the feeling which had existed between them, and which was also called love, she shuddered with loathing. "Well, I'm divorced and become Vronsky's wife. Well, will Kitty cease looking at me as she looked at me today? No. And will Seryozha leave off asking and wondering about my two husbands? And is there any new feeling I can awaken between Vronsky and me? Is there possible, if not happiness, some sort of ease from misery? No, no," she answered now without the slightest hesitation. "Impossible. We are drawn apart by life, and I make his unhappiness, and he mine, and there's no altering him or me. Every attempt has been made. The screw has come unscrewed. Oh, a beggar woman with a baby. She thinks I'm sorry for her. Aren't we all flung into the world only to hate each other, and so to torture ourselves and each other? Schoolboys coming. Laughing Seryozha?" she thought. "I thought, too, that I loved him, and used to be touched by my own tenderness. But I have lived without him. I gave him up for another love, and did not regret the exchange till that love was satisfied." And with loathing she thought of what she meant by that love, and the clearness with which she saw life now, her own and all men's, was a pleasure to her. "It's so with me and Pyotr, and the coachman, Fyodor, and that merchant, and all the people living along the Volga, where those placards invite one to go, and everywhere and always," she thought when she had driven under the low-pitched roof of the Nizhegorod station, and the porters ran to meet her. "A ticket to Obiralovka?" said Pyotr. She had utterly forgotten where and why she was going, and only by a great effort she understood the question. "Yes," she said, handing him her purse, and taking a little red bag in her hand, she got out of the carriage. Making her way through the crowd to the first-class waiting-room, she gradually recollected all the details of her position and the plans between which she was hesitating, and again at the old sore places, hope and then despair poisoned the wounds of her tortured, fearfully throbbing heart. As she sat on the star-shaped sofa waiting for the train, she gazed with aversion at the people coming and going, they were all hateful to her, and thought how she would arrive at the station, would write him a note, and what she would write to him, and how he was at this moment complaining to his mother of his position, not understanding her sufferings, and how she would go into the room, and what she would say to him. Then she thought that life might still be happy, and how miserably she loved and hated him, and how fearfully her heart was beating. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Anna Karenina, Book 7 by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Marianne. A bell rang. Some young men, ugly and impudent, and at the same time careful of the impression they were making, hurried by. Pyotr, too, crossed the room in his livery and top-boots, with his dull animal face, and came up to take her to the train. Some noisy men were quiet as she passed them on the platform, and one whispered something about her to another, something vile, no doubt. She stepped up on the high step and sat down in a carriage by herself, on a dirty seat that had been white. Her bag lay beside her, shaken up and down by the springiness of the seat. With a foolish smile Pyotr raised his hat, with its colored band, at the window, in token of farewell. An impudent conductor slammed the door and the latch. A grotesque-looking lady wearing a bustle. Anna mentally undressed the woman and was appalled at her hideousness, and a little girl laughing affectedly ran down the platform. "Katerina Andreevna, she's got them all, ma tante!" cried the girl. "Even the child's hideous and affected," thought Anna. To avoid seeing anyone, she got up quickly and seated herself at the opposite window of the empty carriage. A misshapen-looking peasant covered with dirt, in a cap from which his tangled hair stuck out all around, passed by that window, stooping down to the carriage wheels. "There's something familiar about that hideous peasant," thought Anna, and remembering her dream, she moved away to the opposite door, shaking with terror. The conductor opened the door and let in a man and his wife. "Do you wish to get out?" Anna made no answer. The conductor and her two fellow passengers did not notice under her veil her panic-stricken face. She went back to her corner and sat down. The couple seated themselves on the opposite side, and intently but surreptitiously scrutinized her clothes. Both husband and wife seemed repulsive to Anna. The husband asked, would she allow him to smoke, obviously not with a view to smoking but to getting into conversation with her. Receiving her assent, he said to his wife in French something about caring less to smoke than to talk. They made inane and affected remarks to one another, entirely for her benefit. Anna saw clearly that they were sick of each other and hated each other, and no one could have helped hating such miserable monstrosities. A second bell sounded, and was followed by moving of luggage, noise, shouting, and laughter. It was so clear to Anna that there was nothing for anyone to be glad of, that this laughter irritated her agonizingly, and she would have liked to stop up her ears and not to hear it. At last the third bell rang, there was a whistle and a hiss of steam and a clank of chains, and the man in her carriage crossed himself. "It would be interesting to ask him what meaning he attaches to that," thought Anna, looking angrily at him. She looked past the lady out of the window, at the people who seemed whirling by as they ran beside the train or stood on the platform. The train, jerking at regular intervals at the junctions of the rails, rolled by the platform, past a stone wall, a signal box, past other trains. The wheels, moving more smoothly and evenly, resounded with a slight clang on the rails. The window was lighted up by the bright evening sun, and a slight breeze fluttered the curtain. Anna forgot her fellow passengers, and to the light swaying of the train she fell to thinking again as she breathed the fresh air. Yes, what did I stop at? That I couldn't conceive a position in which life would not be a misery, that we are all created to be miserable, and that we all know it, and all invent means of deceiving each other. And when one sees the truth, what is one to do? "That's what reason is given man for, to escape from what worries him," said the lady in French, lisping affectedly, and obviously pleased with her phrase. The words seemed an answer to Anna's thoughts. "To escape from what worries him," repeated Anna, and glancing at the red-cheeked husband and the thin wife, she saw that the sickly wife considered herself misunderstood, and the husband deceived her and encouraged in her that idea of herself. Anna seemed to see all their history and all the crannies of their souls, as it were turning a light upon them, but there was nothing interesting in them, and she pursued her thought. "Yes, I'm very much worried, and that's what reason was given me for, to escape. So then one must escape. Why not put out the light when there's nothing more to look at, when it's sickening to look at it all? But how? Why did the conductor run along the footboard? Why are they shrieking, those young men in that train? Why are they talking? Why are they laughing? It's all falsehood, all lying, all humbug, all cruelty." When the train came into the station, Anna got out into the crowd of passengers, and moving apart from them as if they were lepers, she stood on the platform, trying to think what she had come here for and what she meant to do. Everything that had seemed to her possible before was now so difficult to consider, especially in this noisy crowd of hideous people who would not leave her alone. One moment porters ran up to her, proffering their services. Then young men, clacking their heels on the planks of the platform and talking loudly, stared at her. People meeting her dodged past on the wrong side. Remembering that she had meant to go on further if there were no answer, she stopped a porter and asked if her coachman were not here with a note from Count Vronsky. "Count Vronsky? They sent up here from the Vronskys just this minute, to meet Princess Sorokina and her daughter. And what is the coachman like?" Just as she was talking to the porter, the coachman Mihail, red and cheerful in his smart blue coat and chain, evidently proud of having so successfully performed his commission, came up to her and gave her a letter. She broke it open, and her heart ached before she had read it. "I am very sorry your note did not reach me. I will be home at 10," Vronsky had written carelessly. "Yes, that's what I expected," she said to herself with an evil smile. "Very good. You can go home then," she said softly, addressing Mihail. She spoke softly because the rapidity of her heart's beating hindered her breathing. "No, I won't let you make me miserable," she thought menacingly, addressing not him, not herself, but the power that made her suffer, and she walked along the platform. Two maidservants walking along the platform turned their heads, staring at her and making some remarks about her dress. "Real," they said of the lace she was wearing. The young men would not leave her in peace. Again they passed by, peering into her face and with a laugh shouting something in an unnatural voice. The station-master coming up asked her whether she was going by train. A boy selling kvass never took his eyes off her. "My God, where am I to go?" she thought, going farther and farther along the platform. At the end she stopped. Some ladies and children who had come to meet a gentleman in spectacles paused in their loud laughter and talking, and stared at her as she reached them. She quickened her pace and walked away from them to the edge of the platform. The luggage train was coming in. The platform began to sway, and she fancied she was in the train again. And all at once she thought of the man crushed by the train the day she had first met Vronsky, and she knew what she had to do. With a rapid, light step she went down the steps that led from the tank to the rails and stopped quite near the approaching train. She looked at the lower part of the carriages, at the screws and chains, and the tall cast-iron wheel of the first carriage slowly moving up, and trying to measure the middle between the front and back wheels, and the very minute when that middle point would be opposite her. "There," she said to herself, looking into the shadow of the carriage, at the sand and coal dust which covered the sleepers. There, in the very middle, I will punish him and escape from everyone and from myself." She tried to fling herself below the wheels of the first carriage as it reached her, but the red bag which she tried to drop out of her hand delayed her, and she was too late. She missed the moment. She had to wait for the next carriage. A feeling such as she had known when about to take the first plunge in bathing came upon her, and she crossed herself. That familiar gesture brought back into her soul a whole series of girlish and childish memories, and suddenly the darkness that had covered everything for her was torn apart, and life rose up before her for an instant with all its bright past joys. But she did not take her eyes from the wheels of the second carriage, and exactly at the moment when the space between the wheels came opposite her, she dropped the red bag, and drawing her head back into her shoulders, fell on her hands under the carriage, and lightly, as though she would rise again at once, dropped on to her knees. And at the same instant she was terror-stricken at what she was doing. "Where am I? What am I doing? What for?" She tried to get up, to drop backwards, but something huge and merciless struck her on the head and rolled her on her back. "Lord, forgive me all," she said, feeling it impossible to struggle. A peasant muttering something was working at the iron above her, and the light by which she had read the book filled with troubles, falsehoods, sorrow, and evil, flared up more brightly than ever before, lighted up for her all that had been in darkness, flickered, began to grow dim, and was quenched forever. End of chapter 31. And end of Anna Karenina, Book 7, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett.